remember you.
Fear be gone. I would harm no child of my making.
This is your doing. You made me. Made me this creature. What are you?
I am the land. You are our champion.
You selected me. Chose me.
As shall my children yet to come.
What is it you seek?
This age is sickly. An ancient poison, an older rage, brewed in a cauldron newly forged.
This has something to do with the epidemic.
Seek truth, my champion. Defeat the serpent of knowing with iron spur.
I've had enough of others making decisions for me, pretending to know how I should feel or behave. So the vampire who made me is some sort of disembodied entity? Or was he just projecting this vision in my mind? Maybe Edgar can help me with this one.
Good evening.
Evening, Dr. Reed.
Do you need medical attention?
Don't get me wrong, sir. I'm grateful for what you've done, but I've never felt comfortable with doctors.
I'm certain you have your reasons. But let me assure you, I'm not like other doctors you may have consulted with.
It is true. You risked your life to save me, after all. It would be impolite to refuse your counsel.
Goodbye, Mr. Thatcher. Try to take care of yourself.
Jonathan, my sincere condolences for your loss.
Your kindness is much appreciated, my lady.
Is there anything you require?
I spied my mother at the funeral. Have you ever revealed yourself to a member of your family?
No, Jonathan. And I'd advise you even from thinking about it.
But what if I was close to someone and wished to tell them the truth?
Fear, loathing, disgust. And then they will plead to be turned. They will see it as salvation. Then there's the risk of gaining the attention of vampire hunters.
Are we then condemned to lie to those we love?
We are creatures of deception, my friend. But this is more for their sake than ours.
Are we condemned to attend the funerals of all we love?
Dying is the final act of life, Jonathan. Present company excluded. Accepted.
I don't know what to expect. Am I cursed to an eternity of solitude?
With time, we Ekon tend to go into isolation. If we survive long enough, that is.
As a practitioner of the medical sciences, I'm prepared for the death of loved ones. But mourning in the shadows, deprived of sharing one's grief.
We are no longer a part of the circle of life and death. We are undead, my friend, and so we are outcasts.
Goodbye, my lady. Until we meet again.
And I thought last summer's epidemic was different.
God protect us. You've got a leech in the hospital.
Yes, my hospital. My mission is to heal while you go about warring.
You've set the table for a snake. I wonder why there's venom in your food.
I'm growing tired of your song. You're a woodsman, McCullum, not a doctor. Return to your hunt.
Remember, I've a good nose for machinations. I can flare the scent at a mile. You can't hide from the god.
Leave him, Jonathan. This is sacred ground. Neutral territory. And I just had the carpet cleaned. By the sacred stole, this is very bad news. Bad news indeed.
What happened?
The hospital has been attacked. We have injured patients, at least one dead and several missing. This has spiraled out of control. Even the most infirm are asking to be allowed to return home.
We cannot have the people lose faith in this institution. This hospital is their only hope.
Of course, you're right. But we cannot afford a public scandal. It would ruin us. We must restore order, and quickly.
You mentioned a dead patient. Who is he?
She, Jonathan. She was Miss Harriet Jones. I found her room like a slaughterhouse. Blood everywhere. The duty nurse is taking care of the mess.
Very well. I'll help you.
I know this place means something to you. I have noticed how you suppress your appetite when around the staff and patients.
You need to know you can trust me, Edgar.
I do, dear fellow, I do.
Please then, tell me.
Sean Hampton, the man we thought we'd saved at the docks. It seems he was infected after all.
So Hampton became more beast than man.
Exactly. And now Guard of Prewen suspects the hospital of vampire activity. Do you realize what that could mean for us?
Rest assured, I will protect you and your staff.
McCullum is a fanatic. The Guard will stop at nothing. You don't know what they're capable of, Jonathan.
Very well. Since I brought Mr. Hampton here, I will put an end to this.
Sean.
I have a problem. I'm not very good at lubing my speed cubes. You'd think you'd get pretty good at it after 12 years of experience, but for me, that just hasn't been the case. Here are 3 cubes that I've used extensively as my main, lubing them a bunch of times along the way, and today, all 3 of them just feel awful to turn. You've probably experienced this if you've lubed your own cubes before. You set it up for the first time, it feels absolutely awesome, you use it for a few months, and eventually the lube starts to dry out a little bit, gets a little bit gunky, maybe you get some dirt inside, and the cube starts to slow down. You think, that's okay, I'll just add some more lube. The cube feels good for a bit, but it very quickly starts to slow down again. You add in some more lube, and the cube just starts to gunk up with all that lube, and it never feels the same again. That's exactly what's happened to most of my main 3x3s over the years, but these 3 right here are some of the worst, as you're about to see. So in this video, I want to do an experiment and see if I can bring these 3 cubes back from the dead, making them feel more or less like they did when they were new. And if that's possible, I think it'll make me a little less afraid of lubing my cubes in the future, because recently I've kind of just been relying on the factory lube more than anything, and obviously that isn't quite ideal. Plus, one of these 3 cubes is actually still a contender for my main. I bet you can guess which one, so I'd really love to try it out again with it actually set up properly, and maybe I'll start using it again. So to get started, I'm sure you've all thought of the obvious solution to having a bunch of gunky old lube clogging up your cubes, and that is to clean it. But that's easier said than done. In fact, I've actually cleaned all 3 of these cubes multiple times, but they still seem to get worse and worse every time. I think that means my approach to cleaning cubes in the past just hasn't been very good. So today, I'm going to try something new, and I'm going to walk through exactly how I do it on each of these 3 cubes. So I guess I should introduce the cubes real quick. Over here is an original Dian Guhong, my very first speed cube from 2014. This thing has all sorts of mystery silicone lubes inside of it, and now feels very slow and gummy. Next up is the original Volk 3, one of my longest running speed cubes starting around 2016. As you can see from the stickers, this cube has been through a lot. I've set it up countless times, and on the inside is probably one of my grossest, dirtiest cubes. And finally, this one might be a little surprising, the Moyu Weilong WRM Maglev from 2021. I like this cube so much that I tried setting it up over and over again to get it perfect, but it just kept on going downhill, and now it's just unusably slow and annoying to turn. So I think I'll go through these 3 in chronological order, which works out great because the mechanisms get more and more complicated, and show you exactly what I do to try and bring these cubes back to life. So let's start out with the Guhong. This one is really easy to take apart, and that happens to be the first step. Now this one might be the least visibly bad out of all of them, in spite of the white pieces, but I can tell just from taking it apart that these pieces are absolutely covered with way too much lube. I mean, look at this. Pieces should not be sticking together like this on a non-magnetic cube. Now previously, my strategy for cleaning up a cube like this has just been to take some paper towel and very thoroughly wipe off all the major surfaces of every single piece. Maybe if there's some hard to reach spaces in there, I can clean them out like this. My theory is, this does a pretty good job getting most of the lube off the pieces, but the really bad gunky stuff that really slows down your cube, it doesn't really get off. Maybe it gets like stuck into the cracks or just sticks on the surface really well. That's my theory at least. To see if I'm right, I'm going to be cleaning these pieces better than I've ever cleaned a Rubik's Cube before. I might still wipe them all down to get the obvious lube off, but then I'm gonna get a bucket of warm soapy water, dunk all the pieces inside, and scrub them down as much as I possibly can until they look brand new again. Now obviously the plastic does wear down a little bit as you use a cube, so you're never gonna get it exactly back to how it was out of the box, but I think by scrubbing it down to get out all the possible dirt and old lube, we should be able to get it pretty darn close. Now because we're gonna be submerging everything in water, there are a few precautions that we need to take. For one thing, we obviously don't want water to be left over inside of the pieces, so we're going to have to take everything completely apart so that we can let the pieces dry. On an old cube like this, that's very easy. The edges just come apart in 2 pieces, and the corners come apart in 3, like this. Now we also have to think about all the metal pieces in the core. We really want to make sure these are dry when we put the cube back together, so I'm just going to unscrew everything and clean the metal pieces separately from all the plastic ones. Alright, so here are all the plastic pieces completely disassembled for cleaning. This cube is so old that it also happens to have a bunch of little plastic bits that you guys definitely don't have to worry about. And here are all the screws, springs, and washers, which I'll wipe off separately. So the plan is to wipe off all the obvious lube, get some warm soapy water and a toothbrush to get the rest of the lube off and any dirt, then rinse everything off, let it dry, and then we'll come back here to reassemble it. And the cube is assembled. I did put some weight force silicone in the hardware to reduce spring noise. I haven't lubed the pieces yet, but let's go ahead and try it out. And that is pretty bad. I don't know what I was expecting from a 10-year-old speed cube, but it's not great. I think this is a key point that I've never really thought about before, but lubing cubes used to be a lot more important than it is today. I mean, on a modern speed cube, you can get away with a pretty minimal setup or even just the factory lube, whereas on an older cube, you could extract a lot more performance just by lubing the pieces. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that real quick with some cubicle weight 2, just the way I normally would. So I put a fair bit on the outer pieces like this and just spread that around, and then a little tiny bit in the tracks down there, and then we'll put it back together and break that in. I can't say it's improved a whole ton since I cleaned it, but it definitely has gotten rid of that annoying overlubed gummy feel and gotten more of that original plasticky crunchiness back to it. It also definitely feels faster without all the lube slowing it down. Of course, it is still a Guhong, so it's not going to perform amazing, but I definitely am getting more of that nostalgic original feel, which I guess was kind of the goal. So now it's time to move on to the Volk 3. I warned you at the beginning, this is probably the grossest cube of them all, and I'm kind of dreading to see what's inside of here. Okay, I'll explain what's going on with this core in a second, but this cube is kind of the exact opposite of the last one. It is totally dry on the inside, I can't feel any lube, but if you look closely, the pieces are totally disgusting, just covered in dirt. If anything, this might be the most difficult cube to revive, because once you build up enough dirt in your cube, that rapidly speeds up how fast the plastic is breaking down, and so no matter what, this cube is probably going to end up feeling kind of scratchy. But obviously there's still a ton of room for improvement, so we'll see what we can do. Now the pieces of this cube look a lot more similar to a modern speed cube than the Guhong did. The edges still come apart in basically the same way. You pull them apart, but as you can see, we now have 3 pieces instead of just 2. Of course, there's no way to clean the pieces without having the magnets in there too. I don't think soapy water is going to do anything bad to the magnets. We just have to make sure that they're absolutely dry before putting the cube back together. Of course, the corners also have magnets that you have to pay attention to. On most cubes, these come apart very easily. You just pry them open like this. But if you happen to have an original Volk, they have this really annoying thing where they have a cap on the bottom, and then you have to disengage these little clips, and then take the stock of the corner off, and then pry everything else apart. But on most cubes, it'll be very easy to just pry it apart and get to the 4 pieces. And that brings us to the core. And as you can see, this isn't exactly the core that comes in the Volk 3. Looks more like a GAN core, doesn't it? This was a fun little mod that I tried back in the day, converting a Volk to use the GES tension system, but I ended up cutting the plastic a little bit too thin, and it ended up breaking in a bunch of places. So at this point, I think I might just cut my losses and try and convert it back to the original system. So here are all the broken down plastic pieces, which I'll clean the same way as before. Somehow the insides of these corners look even grosser than the outsides. I guess there's some holes in them, so a bunch of dirt got in. Also, since I magnetized this cube myself like 6 years ago, there are some problems with missing magnets that I'll have to fix. And then of course, we'll have to figure out something to do with the core. So let's get started. Alright, that was a lot of work. Not only were there a lot of pieces to clean, but I also ended up having to re-glue the magnets in about half of the pieces. You can also see that I'm back to using the original screws and springs, using a little plastic piece down there that I designed and 3D printed that basically just covers up the big hole that I made previously and makes it work just like the original center. And even though I'm not using them anymore, I also went ahead and cleaned out all those old GES nuts, which also took quite a while. Anyway, I'm very interested to try this one out because again, out of all of my main speed cubes, this is probably the one that was the grossest that had degraded the most in performance. So let's do some first turns. And oh my gosh, that is not only so much better than before, but also such a nostalgic feeling. I mean, it definitely feels far from new. You can tell how much the pieces are worn down just from turning it. This is the definition of a broken in speed cube. That terrible slow gummy feeling is almost completely gone. Obviously it's not quite as fast as it was out of the box, but it certainly is a lot better than it was before. And you can just feel that nice crisp clackiness of the original Volk that brings back so many memories. I am gonna add some lube to the pieces, but only a tiny bit because 1, it doesn't need as much lube as the Guhong did, and 2, I kind of like it the way it is. So just getting that broken in. This obviously isn't the best speed cube in the year 2023, but it has improved so much that I'm happy to call this experiment a big success. All right, it's finally time to move on to the Weilong WRM maglev, or whatever it's called. This, for me, is definitely the most interesting cube out of all of these. It was the most clear case for me that just wiping down the inside of a cube with a paper towel doesn't get rid of all that old gunky lube. And that's not helped by the fact that I obviously over-lubed this last time I tried to set it up, and then proceeded not to break in the lube at all. So right now, the inside of this cube is kind of just a sticky mess. And it gets even worse because this cube is not easy to take apart any further than this. It has one of these newfangled stickerless designs where the plastic doesn't actually go all the way down to the cube, and these caps are not easy to get off. I like using these little plastic pry tools so that you don't accidentally scrape up the plastic. Basically, you just get it in there and then just pull upward. You might have to flip it around and do it on the other side as well. It takes an uncomfortable amount of force. It also seems to bend the plastic right there more than I'd like, but I guess this is the best way to do it. Fortunately though, on the edges, you can actually pop out these adjustable magnets, which means that we have all plastic on the inside and don't have to worry about the metal. Fortunately, the corners are a little bit easier. You just have to pry each part of it upward a little bit like this, and then it should come off very easily. The magnets are glued in here, so again, we have to be careful about not having those wet when we put it back together. But from here, the process should be pretty much the same as the last couple times. The core also looks much more like a modern speed cubing core. We basically just have to unscrew everything and then get rid of the screws, springs, or in the case of a maglev cube, the magnets. Okay, that was a bit of a pain, but we now have all the plastic parts disassembled. We also have all the metal and magnety stuff over here, which I don't think we need to wash at all. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, I find the maglev and the tensioning a little bit finicky on this cube just because it's so adjustable, but I think that's about how I like it, so let's try it out. Oh my gosh. I think that's as close as we're gonna get to 100% back to original out of any of these three cubes. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it perfect. I might have to mess with the settings a little bit more, but this cube has instantly gone from unusably bad to probably top 3 main contender for me. All the old gummy lube is gone. It's back to being just about as fast as I like it. And I'm seriously gonna have to set this up carefully to see if it can actually become my main again. So I guess one thing I've learned throughout this video is that newer cubes really don't need a lot of lube. I put probably a third as much in here as I did in the Guhong, and it already feels like plenty. And if you do put too much lube in, don't panic, you can always wipe it out and try again. But if you have a cube like this that you've solved and lubed countless times, it might just be time to take it apart and do a thorough cleaning. And also, if you account for the fact that these 3 cubes account for maybe 30% of the 3x3 solves that I have ever done, it's pretty amazing how much life you can get out of a $20 or $30 plastic puzzle. But needless to say, I'm very happy with the results of this little experiment. I well and truly brought these 3 cubes back to life, and I might even get a new main out of it. But I hope you all enjoyed the process, because that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Zebra Cubit. Today I'm going to attempt every single event in the WCA using just one hand. On a puzzle as simple as the 3x3, this restriction isn't a big deal. With a bit of practice, you can easily get down to about double your normal solve time, which for the best in the world is still under 10 seconds. So that got me thinking, what would solving one-handed do to all the other WCA events? Would they all take about twice as long, or would some of them be way harder or way easier? So today, that's what we're going to find out. I'm going to scramble up one puzzle for each of the 17 official events, and then attempt to complete each one using just one hand. First up is 2x2, ready to go inside the cube cover. My PR average for this event is 4.46 seconds, so let's see how much slower I become using just one hand. Let's start with our 15 seconds of inspection. Of course, you can touch it using both hands during inspection. I have a plan, 3, 2, 1, and go. Let's get that first side there. Nice, easy OLL. Just gotta remember how to do it using one hand. And 13.30 seconds. Not too bad. Now that happens to be pretty much exactly what I averaged in the next event, 3x3, with a 13.56 average, and I have a feeling I know how this one is gonna go one-handed. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. And I am a little bit out of practice here, but I think I should be able to get it done under 30 would be a good goal. Okay, got a nice easy OLL. And now we have an R-perm, which is kind of a longer PLL, which means I'm probably going to lose the 30-second mark right there. Yeah, 34 seconds, whatever. Now 4x4 is where things start to get a little interesting. With a PR average of 53 seconds, I have a feeling it's gonna take something more like 2 minutes to solve it one-handed. So let's go ahead and do some inspection here. 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay, now the moment of truth. Do we have parity? Yes, we do have parity. This is gonna be a pain. Let's hope I don't mess up this algorithm. Wow, and I even successfully executed an end perm to finish things off. I think I was maybe a little overly optimistic because I didn't feel too bad, so maybe more like 3 times the solve time would be a better guess from now on. 5x5. My normal average is 1 minute and 43 seconds, so if we can do this one-handed in less than, say, 5 minutes, that'd be pretty good. So let's start some inspection here. 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay, and finishing things up with a T-perm here. This is going a lot faster than I was expecting. I guess the more look-head intensive a cube is, like the 5x5, the easier it translates to one-handed because you're able to turn a lot slower while still solving at nearly the same rate. So that was 3 minutes, 44 seconds, a lot faster than I thought. So maybe the big cubes won't be that bad. Next up is 6x6 with a PR mean of 315. So I think it would be a good time if I can solve it in like 6 or 7 minutes. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. Well, we're doing some edge parity here, and there goes the goal of 6 minutes, but I think we're actually making pretty good time still. But there we go, 7 minutes and 9 seconds, so not too much more than double my normal time, and that was the first cube where my arm really started to hurt just from holding it like this. Now I don't have an official mean in 7x7, but my PR single is 5:31, so I guess we're gonna be aiming for around 11 minutes here. This might take a while. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. Now my theory is, because centers require such fast turning compared to the rest of a big cube, that's where you lose the most time trying to do it one-handed. Regardless, I don't ever want to build a big cube center with one hand ever again. Well, the timer has stopped running, which probably means the competition would have kicked us out by now, but we're finishing up this Y-perm here to finish in just over 10 minutes, but that means this was my first cube that I actually finished in less than double my normal time. So maybe 7x7 one-handed wasn't so bad after all. So now that we're done with 2 through 7, the next event on the list is 3x3 blindfolded. My PR single is 301, and this one's gonna be pretty tricky because executing with one hand is difficult enough while you're looking at the cube. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. I guess we can only memorize using one hand. Okay, pretty fast memorization. Let's go ahead and begin execution. And did I flip all those edges correctly? I did. Okay, 6 minutes, 17 seconds. That's actually not a terrible time for me using both hands. I will admit, I did get a little bit of practice with those algorithms because that was my 3rd attempt to get a success. I'm still really happy with 617 though, and from now on, I'm gonna be doing everything in just one try. The next event is pretty unique, fewest moves. Now this is the one time I'm gonna switch over to using my right hand because it involves a lot of writing and I am right-handed. My PR mean is 30 moves. I have the scramble sheet right here, which I haven't looked at yet. I have 1 hour to come up with the shortest possible solution to this scramble. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. Okay, I made a mistake while doing insertions with one hand, and so this is the awkward time where I turn in my paper not knowing if my solution is valid yet. Let's go ahead and check. Okay, that's a relief. I did manage to fix it just in the nick of time. Unfortunately though, my solution came out to 47 moves, which is not exactly ideal. So hey, it might not have been a very good solve, but at least I got to practice some fun FMC techniques. Anyway, it's time for a much less interesting event to do one-handed, and that is one-handed. If there's any event where I'm gonna match my normal time, I have a feeling it's gonna be this one. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. And let's see if we can get 25 seconds. And with the help of a very nice scramble, we got less than 25 seconds, 24.46. So that's probably the only event in this video where I actually did better than my typical average. Next, we have the most annoying puzzle to set down in a cube cover, clock. My PR average is just over 10 seconds, and I have a feeling it's not gonna be too difficult to do one-handed. No lucky cases, it looks like. Oh, we have one. So let's do that. 3, 2, 1, and go. Yeah, okay, that isn't a big deal, just a little bit more time consuming. That took 24 seconds, and I did successfully solve it. Next up, Megaminx. My average on this one is 126, and I have a feeling this one is gonna be very annoying, but not too much slower than normal, because it is very look-ahead intensive. So let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, and go. Yep, 255, so just about twice as long as normal. Pyraminx. My normal average is 5.34, and I really have no idea how this is gonna go. I guess it depends on how lucky of a scramble we get. And yeah, no, I really don't see anything. I guess I'll just have to kind of improvise. So 3, 2, 1, and go. Oh, this is harder to turn than I thought it would be. There we go, we got those two pieces. We got our V. Oh, I accidentally did a layer. Do I know this case? I do know this case. I think it's like this, and then that. Okay, so 16 seconds, that's about triple my normal time. Scube. My normal average is 5.15. This is another one that seems like it should be pretty easy, but I think the turning might be a little bit problematic with just one hand. Anyway, let's see what our scramble gives us. That is a very easy yellow layer, so let's do that. 3, 2, 1, and go. Hopefully we get a nice case at the end of this, and that is definitely not a nice case. I think you do this one like this. Not very good with my Scube algorithms. Yeah, and then we gotta do another double sledgehammer. And sledgehammer is not exactly the easiest, but not as hard as I thought it would be. So 14.65, again, around 3 times as long as normal. Square one. My normal average is 27 seconds, and this is probably the event that I'm least looking forward to because I can hardly remember the algorithms using both hands. Anyway, let's see what this scramble is. Ooh, that is a cube shape that I think I know. Let's see if I can execute it correctly. 3, 2, 1, and go. I think it's something like this. And then maybe this and that. Okay, that was a nice easy cube shape, probably faster than normal. And I actually managed to do the very first algorithm correctly. We are on a roll here. This is gonna be a great time. And then add on to that a very easy case at the end, and that was probably the best possible square one time I could have ever gotten one-handed. 113, still over double the normal time, but I will take it. This next event, 4x4 blindfolded, I unfortunately forgot a bunch of the algorithms for, so I'm just gonna do the best that I can, given what I do remember. On the bright side though, my best official result is a DNF, so it shouldn't be too hard to match that. Let's go ahead and begin in 3, 2, 1, go. Okay, sub 2 minute inspection, let's go. And, I was trying to do something funny, but even that failed. Well, DNF, that ties my official result. Wait, I did it in 420, that's funny, right? And to follow up that disaster, we have an event that I've never completed, 5x5 blindfolded. So once again, I'm just gonna try and do the best that I can, given what I do now. So 3, 2, 1, let's begin. Okay, I'm ready. And look at that, I solved all the 3x3 pieces. I was so slow that the timer ran out, but hey, that's at least a little cooler than the 4x4, right? Well, regardless, it's still a DNF, so let's move on. Now let's try and finish things off on a better note with the 17th and final event, multi-blind. Now I have a bunch of successes in competition, but for some reason my best is still a 2 out of 2, so I'm gonna try and at least match that in under the time limit of 20 minutes. So, without further ado, let's begin the final event, memorizing 2 cubes. Okay, I'm ready. And there's the first cube, hopefully a success. On to the next one. There it is. Okay, I'm actually feeling really good about this. And, okay, this one was solved. This one was off by quite a few pieces. I probably just missed one move on this. That was under the time limit of 20 minutes, although because I only solved 1 cube out of 2, it is technically a DNF, even though it's only half a cube away from matching my PR. So as tempted as I am to try again, I'm gonna stick to what I said and call that my 1 attempt. And you know what? It was a pretty good attempt at that. But yeah, that is what it looks like to attempt every single WCA event with just one hand. I started this in the morning and the sun is already going down, so it took a little bit longer than I expected, but we got it done. Obviously, we had a little bit more success on this side of the table compared to the blind events. Those ones were very difficult, but I think we made a good attempt on all of them. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this pretty insane challenge, because that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. This is a 3x3 Pyraminx, or at least that's what I'm gonna call it because it has 1, 2, 3 layers. But you can imagine what it would look like if we chopped off this bottom layer and turned it into a 2x2 pyraminx. It'd basically be 4 of these tips around one central piece, and as you can imagine, it would be pretty useless with all 4 just turning in one direction. In fact, it would look something like this. Now, unfortunately, this isn't actually a real 2x2 pyraminx, it's actually something called a pyromorphix, but you can imagine how silly this puzzle would be if it only turned around the tips. And stepping down one more time, this is a 1x1 pyraminx. Its turning, or lack thereof, is pretty self-explanatory, and I actually just custom made this one so that I'd have a stickerless version. So now we have a 1x1 pyraminx, a 2x2 pyraminx, and a 3x3 pyraminx, all in stickerless. So what comes next? Well, the 4x4 pyraminx, of course. This one is made by Shengshao, and it's been around for quite a while. As you can see, we're stepping up the normal pyraminx with now 1, 2, 3, 4 layers for quite a fun extra challenge. But do you really think I'm gonna settle with an old stickered 4x4 pyraminx when the rest of my collection isn't stickerless? Of course not. Plus, Shengshao doesn't even make a 5x5 pyraminx, so where would we go from there? That is where Yushin comes in today. If you don't know, Yushin is known for taking already mass-produced puzzles and making way better versions of them, like the recent Yushin Gigaminx, which is now by far the best on the market. And that's why I was so excited when I saw that Yushin had made not only a new stickerless 4x4 pyraminx, but also a 5x5 one. Of course, they didn't invent either of these puzzles. Even the 5x5 has been around for a long time with the Mefferts one, but if I know anything about the brands Mefferts and Yushin, I know that this one is going to turn a lot better. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Let's start off by unboxing the Yushin 4x4 pyraminx. As you can see on the box, it says Speed Cube, also Speed Cube, and Speed Cube. Now, if you've never tried a 4x4 pyraminx, I would say it's more than just a novelty. It's actually one of the more fun non-WCA puzzles out there, and would possibly make a good candidate for a new WCA puzzle. It looks like the only accessory it comes with is this instruction booklet. I haven't touched one of these for quite a while, but I think I remember how to solve it, so we shouldn't be needing that. I would say it looks really nice with the stickerless outside and black inside, kind of that look that Gan popularized. The stickerless shades look pretty nice, very similar to this other Yushin pyraminx that I have. The logo sticker is removable, which is great, and the plastic finish is kind of matte, not quite as glossy as this one, but also not quite frosted. And interestingly, you can see that the size of this puzzle isn't that much bigger than a normal pyraminx. And that, combined with these really nice rounded edges, means that this puzzle is actually a lot more comfortable to hold in your hands than the much bigger and pointier Shengshao 4x4 pyraminx. But of course, there still is one more big thing we need to try out, the turning. So let's do some first turns here. And that actually strikes me as a little bit slow, a little bit stiff. Honestly, I am a little bit underwhelmed by the turning. I guess it just feels dry, like it needs some lube. So I guess let's go ahead and add some and see what happens. Okay, that was a bit of a help, but it definitely didn't fix everything. I would say that calling this a speed cube is a bit of a stretch, just because the backwards corner cutting is pretty much non-existent. If a layer isn't quite aligned, the rest of the cube is not turning. And without corner cutting, that means you can't really have the fast fluid turns as you would have on a real speed cube. And that is a little bit disappointing. But don't leave just yet, because there is actually something that I really like about the turning of this one compared to the Shengshao, and that is the clicking mechanism. As you can see, each time you finish a turn, it perfectly clicks into place on all of the layers. Now, this isn't using magnets or even ball bearings. I think it's literally just one piece of plastic clicking into another, but it still is much superior to the Shengshao version, which has no alignment mechanism at all, so you have to make sure to manually align each layer after each turn. Now, you could argue that the raw turning alone is actually a little bit better on the Shengshao, but I think with the alignment mechanism and just the better form factor, I would probably rather use the Yushin. You still have to slow down and make sure the puzzle is aligned after each turn, but because the puzzle is helping you do that alignment, I'm going to give it a slight edge over the Shengshao. Anyway, it looks like we're scrambling up the cube now, so let's go ahead and try out a quick solve. Now, I don't think I've solved one of these in over a year, so let's see if I remember how to do it. Of course, there is one step that I do remember, and that is solving the tips. That was pretty easy. And I think the next thing that I normally do is take a look at these center pieces here and these edge pieces here and kind of solve it like a pyraminx. So for example, this would be solved relative to each other. So I've created my V here, just doing some basic L4E. So now let's insert this edge at the back like this, and then figure out what case we have. This, I believe, is the annoying one where we have to do this. And then hopefully, yeah, all the inner pieces will be solved. So now we have to deal with all these little outer edge pieces. So what I like to do is find an easy one like this that goes into its correct spot with just one move. And then we move that out of the way, undo the first turn, and then undo the second turn. Another way we can do that is like with this one. So we can move it into the correct spot, move it away, back, and back to solve that one. Sometimes it starts to get a little bit tricky, like having to do setup moves to avoid messing up stuff that we've done already, but eventually everything just sort of falls into place, which is very satisfying. Now, of course, we still have these 3 centers left over, and I definitely just had to look up my own tutorial to realize that I did this wrong, but with a fancy algorithm like this, we can go ahead and solve it. So yeah, that went pretty well, aside from the part that I totally forgot. And overall, the Yushin Master Pyraminx, I'm not super impressed with the turning, but in a lot of other ways, it is a nice little upgrade. Anyway, let's move on to unboxing the 5x5 Pyraminx, which I'm very excited about because I've never tried one of these before. Interestingly, the box is a lot fancier, but they make no claims about it being a speed cube this time. So let's go ahead and get this 5x5 triangle cube opened up. There we go. That looks awesome. No other accessories in the box, just the cube. And this thing, on the one hand, strikes me as really big, but I guess if you compare it to like the 4x4 Pyraminx, it's really not that much bigger. It's just sort of puffed out into a pillowed shape. I guess that makes it a little bit easier to hold in your hands and to turn. And yeah, everything else I said about the stickerless design on the 4x4 also holds true for this one. So let's jump right into the turning. Again, I've never turned a 5x5 Pyraminx before, so this should be pretty interesting. Of course, the tips themselves do move, which looks hilarious, turning just one tiny part of such a massive puzzle. The next layer down, and the next one, and the next one. That is a lot of layers. Funnily enough, this one actually strikes me as having slightly better turning than the 4x4 did. It feels like it has a little bit of factory lube inside, which probably helps. And just doing some turns like this, it feels a lot more fluid than the 4x4. Wow, out of the two of them, this might actually be the speed cube, despite what the box says. Yeah, this one is legitimately just a lot more fluid with better corner cutting, so that combined with the clicking mechanism, which is also on this cube, just makes for a much better turning puzzle. So yeah, Yushin really messed with my expectations here. I was expecting the 4x4 to be a great speed cube, then the 5x5 to be kind of meh, but in reality, it was the exact opposite. And the really exciting thing is that I still have never solved one of these. For all I know, it could be just as easy as a 4x4 or way harder. So let's go ahead and get it scrambled up here and see what it takes to solve. All right, let's try this out. Now there is one thing on this cube that I definitely do know how to solve, and that is the tips. But once we do those, I'm going to be a little bit lost for how to proceed. I have a feeling that these outer edges are going to be just like the ones on the 4x4, and so in addition to these pieces, I think all of these outer edges will be very easy to solve at the very end, so we can ignore those for now. So for the first step, I have a feeling that we want to solve these inner edges relative to these sort of corner pieces. I think that'll be pretty easy. It's just these center pieces that are kind of scaring me. But let's try it. Okay, I think I said what I was gonna do there. That wasn't too hard. I can also solve these very inner center pieces by just doing this a few times. There we go. Now I think the tricky part is gonna be these outer centers. Once I figured those out, I think I can solve the rest of it really easily. But until then, yeah, I'm kind of just stuck. I'm gonna mess around with it for a little bit. Okay, after like 15 minutes of messing around, I finally figured it out. I'll leave that step as an exercise for the viewer. It wasn't that hard. Basically, it just involved a lot of R, U, R prime U, and some setup moves. So now let's work on all these outer edges, which I'm sure will be identical to the 4x4 Pyraminx. So for example, we put one into place, move out of the way, and that's solved. And here we go. That wasn't too hard. And now I have a feeling these very outer edges should be very easy as well. So we should just be able to do something like this to solve that one. I guess we can do this, which sort of solves them. And then we have these two flipped. And maybe just the normal Pyraminx algorithm will work. Let's try it. And there we go. The 5x5 Pyraminx is solved. So yeah, this was one of the most fun puzzles I've solved in a long time because it was challenging, but also just simple enough that I was able to figure it out. Like I was saying before, the 4x4 is a really fun puzzle. If you have the skills to solve a Pyraminx, you can probably figure out how to solve this one. And if you figure out how to solve this one, you can probably figure out the 5x5 as well. It's just a really fun lineup of puzzles all around. Now the 4x4 comes in at $13, which is slightly cheaper than the Shengshao. So I definitely recommend this one over the Shengshao with its slightly nicer turning. There is also a Qi one, which I haven't tried out. It's a little bit more expensive, but the turning might be a little bit better. Now the 5x5 Pyraminx is a lot more expensive at $33, but it is a much better puzzle, a bigger puzzle, and I think I'd recommend it more highly than the 4x4, even despite the price. And of course, you can't forget just how nice these puzzles look. The stickerless with black insides is just a really nice design. So I'll put links to where you can buy either of them down below at thecubicle.com. And as always, you can use discount code C3Cubing for 5% off anything there. So coming back to how we started the video, this is my finished stickerless Pyraminx collection. I mean, one of them is kind of pretending to be something it isn't, but you know what? It looks very nice. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this look at two new Pyraminx puzzles from Yushin. One of them is kind of meh, but the other one is pretty great. But that's pretty much it for this video, and I'll see you guys next time.
Hey, it's Expired Cubing, and this is going to be a critique on Dominic Radisi's 4.09 Pyraminx average. So let's get into it with the first scramble. So for this solve, I bet you were jumping with joy when you saw this, and that yellow is super easy. As you can see,
This is a 3x3 Pyraminx, or at least that's what I'm going to call it because it has one I have a problem. I'm not very... Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. I'm here at Mile High Mega Comp 2023, the biggest cubing competition in Colorado history by about double. There's gonna be 250 people competing in 10 rounds of events, so let's go ahead and check it out. Now I actually have to compete in the very first group of the day in 6x6 in about 10 minutes, so I should probably get warmed up. Now this first round felt a little bit rushed. They actually called us up early, just as I was starting my first practice solve, so I was not warmed up at all. 6x6 is also an event where just last year I got a really massive PR of about 15 seconds. So needless to say, I wasn't really expecting a PR in this round, and I definitely didn't get one. I ended up being around 20 seconds slower with a 3:35. Well, that round didn't go amazing. We'll blame it on the one practice solve. But hey, at least I got a mean. I think next up I have to help scramble Skewb. Alright, scrambling successful. Now it's time to compete in Skewb. At my last competition I got an amazing sub 5 average, so now I really have no expectations. Skewb has really been a weird event for me for quite a while because I'm really good at the intermediate method of just spamming sledgehammers everywhere, and I know quite a lot of the advanced cases. I'm just really slow at recognizing those, so I end up getting a lot of really good times, but also a few really bad times, which is what you're seeing in this average right here. 3 good solves and 2 bad solves makes for an okay average. We'll have to see if that makes it to finals. Anyway, next up is the main event of the day, 3x3. Well, I managed to sneak in about 5 minutes of practice before my 3x3 round, and I'm actually solving really well right now, so let's try and get a 13-second average. 3x3 was a funny one because all of my official averages this year have been really slow, like 16 seconds, whereas before this round, I was just feeling really good, telling myself to turn slow, focus on look ahead, and it must have worked because this average was much less terrible than all my other ones this year. Granted, what I really need is just to start practicing more regularly, but in the absence of that, it is nice to know that turning slower really does make you faster. Alright, that was one of my best ever official 3x3 averages. Super happy about that. Next up is the final round of Skewb, which I actually made it into. Skewb finals are always a little bit nerve-wracking, knowing that it's the one event where I actually have a chance of making the podium, but at this competition, I wasn't thinking about that at all, and I think because of that, I actually solved a little bit better. But it is a little bit heartbreaking looking back at that 6.6 where I messed up an easy case, and knowing that I would have podiumed if it were about a second faster. Another 3 good solves and 2 bad solves. Not gonna podium, but at least it beats my first round average. But this morning has just been non-stop solving and filming and talking to fans, so luckily now we get a short break for lunch. Back from lunch, now it's time for the second round of 3x3. I'm definitely not going to make finals, but let's try and at least keep up the good average. Okay, scratch that. Let's just sit here and appreciate this 7-second cross. Just look at that amazing solving right there. Such efficiency. Oh, it's almost done, and there we go. So obviously this round didn't go too great. That whole turning slowly thing kind of went out the window, and I somehow ended up messing up a bunch of my crosses. Let's just pretend that never happened and move on to the first round of 4x4. This was one of those averages where you get a really good time at the very beginning, you get a little bit nervous, and then it's all downhill from there. I was getting a lot of high 40s, low 50s in practice, so I knew it definitely had PR potential, but that very quickly turned into a bunch of mediocre times, each one getting slower than the last, so let this be a lesson. Always wait until the end of your average to get a good solve. pretty good single, pretty good average, but no PRs. That's kind of the theme of today. Next up is Pyraminx. Ah, the PokeCube. This is probably the event where I'm most in need of practice right now, because I learned a new method quite a few years back, got good enough to justify switching from my old method, but then never actually practiced enough to get as fast as I used to be. So that 5.34 is now by far my longest running PR from 2017. Wow, those were the world's easiest scrambles. Kinda makes me wish I'd practiced Pyraminx sometime in the last year. There still is a chance that I make it to finals though. And time for the last new event of the day, Megaminx. I can't say I've really been practicing too much, but we'll see how it goes. Not only have I not been practicing Megaminx, but it was also getting towards the end of the day, and I just could not muster the amount of look ahead and piece recognition that you need to be fast at this cube. So I ended up with 2 barely acceptable times, although even those were a lot slower than my PR average, followed by a bunch of times that were just absolute garbage. I guess that's a sign that I should probably do more than 0 practice solves before a competition. Well, that went about how I should have expected, given how much I practiced. Luckily, though, I did make Pyraminx finals, so I still have one more chance to compete for the day. Yeah, this one didn't go too great either, but funny story, I was actually in 16th place in round 1 of Pyraminx, so the very last person to make it into finals, and then in the finals here, despite my terrible average, I ended up improving to 15th place. Granted, the only reason that happened is because the 16th place person DNF'd their average, but you know what, I'll take that technical win over getting dead last in a round. Well, realistically, that's probably closer to what I actually average on Pyraminx right now, but that concludes my 9th and final round of the day. The only one I didn't make it into was 3x3 finals, but that was definitely one of my favorite Colorado cubing competitions. It kind of felt like a mini nationals with so many people here. It was just cool to have such a big local competition. I did really well on a few events, not so great in others, but overall I'm still happy with my results. But I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Force cubes are pretty much the definition of a useless puzzle, especially if you're lazy like me and never put stickers on them. But there's another type of puzzle that's also completely useless, even though it does have stickers, like the 1x1x2 or the corner twist Pyraminx. I really like this one in particular because it's so simple that it looks like there's gotta be some sort of trick to how it turns, but nope, it literally just moves around the corners and any 2-year-old could solve it. So that got me thinking, what if we could combine these 2 types of uselessness by taking a stupid simple puzzle like this one and then turning it into a force cube? So in this video, I'm going to be making not 1, but 2 sets of these utterly terrible force cubes, and then in the end, we can battle them out to see just which one is the most useless. So let's get started. Of course, to make a force cube out of a 4-sided puzzle, you're going to need 4 of those puzzles. And luckily these things are pretty cheap because that's exactly how many I bought. Anyway, let's get these things opened up and then we can get started. Now the first step of making any force cube is taking these puzzles completely apart, down to the individual colored pieces. Now that's going to be a little bit tricky here because it's not completely obvious how to do that. You can't just like pry a piece out like on a 3x3, and there aren't even any screws visible on the inside. Instead, I think the key to getting these apart are these little tiny plastic clips here. As you can see, there's one blue one there and another blue one right there. So if we engage those plastic clips with like a screwdriver, we should be able to pop this cap right off. And there we go. That was not easy, but I made it work. You can now see the 2 little clips I was talking about and how they attach down inside of there. And now we just have to do that 47 more times. Alright, that is a lot of colorful triangles. My hand is definitely hurting from having to pry those all out, but luckily we are done with that for now. The puzzles themselves look pretty funny. There's a lot of little spiky bits sticking out that you'd never guess were there until you take it apart. There's also screws in there, but we don't actually have to use those because all the colored pieces are already off. I guess it's kind of funny that despite being so painful to take all these off, we don't actually have to disassemble the functional part of the mechanism at all. We can just keep it together like this. Anyway, the final step is a much simpler one. We just have to grab a bunch of pieces of the same color and then stick them back onto the cube like this. Let me do that with one corner piece right here. There we go. Definitely a lot easier than taking them off. And now we just have to repeat that 45 more times. And here we have created perhaps the world's worst force cubes. Definitely the most useless ones, at least. Now, I'm not a big fan of this pastel stickerless color scheme that they put on these puzzles. I think it kind of just looks bland, but I think we can all agree that when we separate it out into all different colors, they look a lot nicer. So even though they are utterly useless, if you had any doubts, yes, turning them does absolutely nothing. At least it makes them look a little bit nicer. But there is something that feels kind of fitting about turning such a simple puzzle into a force cube. Like with something more complex like a Megaminx, it kind of just feels like a shame that you took away all the difficulty from such an interesting puzzle. Whereas with this thing, you're not really decreasing the difficulty level at all, so it's kind of just meant to be. But even though these things might hold the useless force cube crown for now, there's about to be another big contender. And that's because there's another puzzle out there that is equally useless as the corner twist Pyraminx. And that is the Magical Pyramid Puzzle Series Unicorn Cube.
A Magical Pyramid Puzzle Series Unicorn Cube!
Also known as the Unicorn Cube, this thing is also just as simple as it looks, turning only around each of the 4 corners. It's pretty much the exact same puzzle as the corner twist Pyraminx, but now with 6 sides. That's like 2 additional sides for no reason. So much more uselessness. So of course, I just had to make force cubes out of these as well. So I went ahead and bought 6 of them. I have no idea why this one in particular decided to be oriented differently, but I guess we can look past that and open them up. There we go. And wait a minute, I thought it would just be rotated inside the box. No, it's actually a mirror image of all the other ones. That's crazy. It's like a unicorn out of all the unicorns. I'm actually really curious now, so if you have a unicorn cube yourself, let me know. Do you have the normal version with the lines facing this way, or the unicorn version with the lines facing this way? And just in case this one is actually really special, I think I'm going to swap it out with my original unicorn cube and make force cubes with all of the normal ones. Now to begin, I do expect these to be just as difficult to take apart as the corner twist Pyraminx. Looking inside, again, there's nothing to pop out, nothing to unscrew. All we have is some little plastic clips down inside of there. Hopefully it should be a little bit easier though, now that I have some experience. So let's go in there with the screwdriver and push up and see if it will pop out. Yep, there we go. It is a little bit trickier because now we can only access one of the 2 plastic clips from the outside, but still, it didn't seem too bad to get that one off, so now we just have to do that 71 more times. Okay, now that is a lot of colorful triangles. Anyway, let's take a look at one of these cores here just for fun. Not quite as spiky as the other one, but it is still perfectly functional in its nice and useless way. You can kind of see now that the core of this cube is basically one big triangle right in the middle. Kind of interesting to look at. But just like before, we can go ahead and start putting these caps on again. Should be a lot easier than taking them off. There is one of them snapped on, and here is one entire white corner. So now we just have to do that 69 more times, and then we'll have a nice set of unicorn force cubes. And here are the finished products. Once again, I'm really happy with how they look. I think these pastel colors are a lot nicer when they're all separated out like this. And in case you had any doubts in your mind, yes, they are entirely pointless now, even more than they were originally. But that brings up the ultimate question of this video. Which one of these 2 types of force cubes is the most pointless? Well, okay, obviously this one is more pointy, but which one is more useless? In a way, they truly are the exact same puzzle. If you hold them up like this, you can see that they're literally just 4 corner pieces arranged in exactly the same way, which can each rotate 120 degrees. So does having fewer sides mean that it was an easier puzzle to begin with, and therefore it's more useless? Or does having more sides mean that some of them are unnecessary, so you're wasting those sides, and therefore it is more useless? Okay, I admit, trying to compare these 2 is a pretty useless proposition in the first place, so feel free and debate that out in the comments. As for me, I'm not going to worry about it, and I'm just happy with my 2 new twin sets of force cubes. Personally, I don't think I'd recommend making either of these mods yourself, just because it was such a pain to pry off all 120 of those caps, and it does mangle up the plastic quite a bit. But if you want to buy either of the original puzzles, just for the sake of having something useless of your own, the links will be down in the description as always. They're only $6 or $7 each, and you can use discount code Z3Cubing to get 5% off anything from thecubicle.com. So yeah, we set out to make the worst force cubes in the world, but I think we ended up with some puzzles that are actually pretty cool, albeit pretty useless. But that's pretty much it for the video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3Cubing. Today I'm going to attempt every single event in the WCA using just one hand. On a puzzle as simple as the 3x3, this restriction isn't a big deal. With a bit of practice, you can easily get down to about double your normal solve time, which for the best in the world is still under 10 seconds. Magnetize a gear cube. When I got that comment a few months back, I thought, that's a great idea. But then I realized, would it even be possible? On the surface, the gear cube looks incredibly complicated. You do a single turn, and you just have so many different pieces moving in all different directions. But in reality, the gear cube is actually a very similar puzzle to the 3x3. They have the exact same types of pieces, centers, corners, and edges, and believe it or not, the inner mechanism is actually identical on these two puzzles. The only real difference is that the edge pieces on the gear cube can spin. And also, a gear cube would actually be a very useful puzzle to have magnetized. For one thing, it's possible to do a turn like this that looks complete, but actually isn't. And even once you have done a complete turn, sometimes it doesn't look like it because these edge pieces are all spun around. So it'd be very nice to have that quick tactile feedback from the magnets to know that this is a valid position, whereas this is not, without even having to look at the puzzle. So then, why not just glue some magnets in there and have yourself a great speed cube? Well, let's just say there's a reason that no one has ever done this before, and that's because it's not nearly that simple. Now it is about that easy on a 3x3, but if you take a look at where the magnets actually are, you have a pair attracting each edge to each corner, and then look at the same spot on a gear cube, there's no way you're gonna fit a magnet in such weird shaped pieces. And even if you could, it wouldn't work because, again, the edge pieces can spin. So clearly we're gonna have to take a much different approach to magnetize our gear cube. If we can't fit the magnets on the outside of the pieces, then we're gonna have to dig into the inside to find a place for them. Luckily, this gear cube does come apart pretty easily. You just pry off one of the center pieces, and there's a screw underneath that you can unscrew to get everything apart. And there we go. Now we can pop this layer off and take a peek inside. Now, if you know anything about magnetizing puzzles, you will be simultaneously relieved to find that there's a lot of extra space inside, but also kind of terrified because there doesn't seem to be anywhere to glue a pair of magnets. Now, traditionally, we'd always have pairs of magnets attracting the corners to the edges. Again, it doesn't matter too much if we can't put them on the outside of the puzzle. It works just as well if we can put them on the inside. But then even if you look on the inside of the puzzle, what you really want is a flat surface right where the pieces meet, so you can glue a magnet on one side and a magnet on the other side. But if you take a look at these two pieces, there just isn't anything flat whatsoever. So option one would be to precariously put the magnets vertically right here, one on each piece, but it'd be basically impossible to get the magnets to stay in exactly the right spot. Even super glue would not be strong enough. So then option two would be to glue the magnets in horizontally like this. It'd be very easy to glue a magnet right on top of the surface of the corner right there. And then what you'd actually do is drill a hole into this wing of the edge piece and then embed the magnet inside of it. That way the two magnets would be right on top of each other on the edge and the corner. But even though it'd be easier to hold the magnets in place, it would still be very precise and would require a lot of work. This is something I've only ever seen on mass-produced puzzles, like Scubes, rather than handmade puzzles. So then option three would be to just ditch the concept of corner edge magnets entirely. In fact, in this case, I think a better idea might actually be edge to center magnets. If you think about it, there's actually the exact same number of places on a cube where an edge touches a center compared to edges touching corners. That means we can do this with the exact same number of magnets, 48. There really isn't any reason not to have edge to center magnets. The only reason that it's typically edge to corner is because the corners tend to have more room inside. It wouldn't actually change anything to have the magnets in the centers instead. So then the question is, why do I think it would be easier to put them on the centers in this case? Well, if you look at it, they have this nice big flat surface, which would actually make it very easy to arrange the magnets vertically like this. Well, it'd be easy on one side at least. You could just glue the magnet straight to the center. But on the other side, it's still not completely obvious how you'd attach the magnet vertically to that edge. So, as I've been doing in a lot of recent videos, I turned to 3D printing. As you can see, I designed and printed this piece right here that has holes on either side that perfectly fit 2 little magnets. And what I can do is glue this piece right onto the bottom of the edge like this. It doesn't interfere with the mechanism at all. And what this does is position a magnet on either side in exactly the right spot to line up with the magnet that we glue onto the centerpiece. As you can see, there's just enough of a gap there to fit the magnet and a little bit of room to slide past. In fact, let me glue these 2 pieces together real quick and show you. And here we have the 3D printed part glued onto the edge piece, as well as 1 of 4 magnets glued onto this corner piece. As you can see, when they slide past each other, the magnets line up perfectly and attract to each other, but without quite touching. So yeah, this is exactly what we need to magnetize the gear cube. I'm actually really happy I came up with this. I literally don't think you could have made a more elegant solution. Now, I think you guys have seen enough 3D printing time lapses recently, so I just went ahead and printed out 12 of these off camera, which are very satisfying to break off of here. And there we go. So we can go ahead and stick some magnets into all of them, glue those onto all the edges, and glue some more magnets onto all the centers, and then we have ourselves a magnetic gear cube. So let's go ahead and start the time lapse. And here we have both halves of the cube, just like before, except now magnetized. I just wanted to stop here and appreciate how cool the magnets look. Not only the ones facing you, but also way down inside of there. You just have such perfect symmetry. It looks so cool. I haven't tried turning it yet, but I'm very optimistic that my plan will work out exactly like I wanted. So let's go ahead and get this screw back in here and screw it back together. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and get that center cap back on and then take a look at our new magnetic gear cube. Of course, on the outside, it looks exactly the same as it did before. That's to be expected. But when we go ahead and try and turn it, I definitely feel a little bit of resistance right there, like it's holding us into place. And then we can break away from it. No magnetic click at all right there because that's not a real turn. And then a nice snap into place on the next position. That's actually a fairly strong magnetic click. As you can see, it's very easy to just do flick turns like this and have it line up perfectly every time. There's a couple of reasons for that. For one, I think the magnets are actually physically closer together than they would be on a normal cube because there aren't a bunch of layers of plastic in between them. They're basically just floating right next to each other. And two, because the gear cube basically forces you to turn 2 layers at the same time, that means you're having 8 pairs of magnets engage at every turn rather than just 4 of them. But nevertheless, I think you can get away with having pretty strong magnets on a gear cube. It's such a big, clunky puzzle to begin with. They kind of need to be strong to be able to feel them over all the other mechanical stuff going on. And also, it's not like a harsh, precise magnetic click like you get on some 3x3s. It's more of just a soft, general area of magnetism, which feels really nice. It kind of feels like it's guiding you into place. Just a really good setup for this cube. Needless to say, I'm extremely happy with how this turned out. I wouldn't change a thing if I did it again, and I think that magnets in a gear cube are legitimately more useful than people might think. I'm surprised I haven't seen anyone else try it before. But I guess we can't end the video without at least trying out a quick solve. I'll admit, I haven't solved the gear cube for probably over a year at this point, so we'll see how this goes. Let's go ahead and try and get our corners together first. So we do that, and that, and that. I guess we can get some of our centers and edges in the correct spot by doing this a few times. So there we go, these ones are all correct. And then maybe we can just alternate moves on these other layers until the rest of everything solves itself. Like that, and like that. Okay, I think I managed to put everything in the right spot, so we just gotta turn it a bunch of times on each axis like this until everything gets kind of lined up. There we go, and the final one here. Okay, now everything is in the right spot, and it's cubic, and this is actually a weird case that you can only get on the Chi gear cube. It doesn't happen on the original Meffert's gear cube because they have different numbers of teeth on the corners, so you can get a bit of different behavior. But the way to solve this is to just alternate moves like this a few times, like that, and then there we go, the gear cube is now solved. And I guess I probably take magnets for granted nowadays because I almost didn't notice them during that solve, but the couple of times that they did catch my attention, it was always super pleasant. Like, oh hey, I'm glad the cube clicked into place there to let me know I was done turning. So yeah, overall a quick little mod that seems seriously underrated now that I've done it. But I hope you all enjoyed the video, because that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to make a 2x2 that, well, does this. After releasing my video about the world's lightest 2x2, I received a bit of a funny suggestion at a cubing competition. What if you took each piece of this 2x2 and then attached another piece that would just sort of be loosely dangling off of the cube? If you added one of those on all 8 corners, then you'd be left with just one big jangly 2x2. So that got me thinking. These world's lightest cubes would make for some epically impractical keychain cubes, but it also made me think about some fun tricks that you can do with 3D printing. If you don't know, this cube was entirely 3D printed, apart from the core. Basically, the idea was to take the smallest 2x2 core possible, and therefore the lightest one, and then 3D print the lightest possible extensions on top of that to make it into a full-size 2x2. But the idea of a 3D printed, hollow cube like this with something dangling off of it brought back a memory of one of the very first things that I ever 3D printed. The date on my computer says I designed this in 2015, and what it is just 2 cubes that were printed so that they were permanently interlocked with each other. It's a very simple idea, but I love how impossible it feels. Like they're 2 separate solid pieces of plastic, not glued together or anything, yet they're still somehow attached to each other. So my first thought when I heard the idea about the jingly 2x2 was you could replace each one of these corners with a pair of these. So one of these cubes would be attached to the core, like this, and the other one would just sort of be dangling off. Imagine this multiplied by 8. And so, I got to work making a prototype. Here is basically the design I came up with. As you can see, 2 cubes interlocked with each other. One of them right here is fitted perfectly to fit onto the core of a 2x2. As you can see, 8 of these would look basically just like the world's lightest 2x2. The only difference is, it's a little bit less hollow on the inside because it's a lot easier to print this way. Plus, we don't care about the weight anymore. Also, the outer piece isn't completely hollow either, and that's because we're printing these all at once now, which means we can't do the stickerless design. And so instead, I'm gonna put stickers on the outside. So if you can imagine it, it'll kind of just look like a normal black 2x2, except if the outsides of all the pieces popped off and we're now just dangling there, barely holding on for dear life. And if you can't imagine it, well, don't worry, because we'll get there very soon. But first, I have a bit of an issue. This is the only 2x2 core like this I have left, and I was actually planning to use it for a different mod. Now these cores come from the mini Ishin 2x2, and these little cubes are very good for modding. They're what I made the 1x1x2 out of, as well as this 2x2 octahedron mod. But unfortunately, as far as I can tell, these mini 2x2s are no longer for sale. At least, I can't find anywhere to buy them. If anyone knows of a place, definitely let me know. So in the meantime, here's my solution. These mini fused 2x2s are still pretty easy to find online, and it turns out they actually have pretty much the exact same mechanism on the inside. And the cool thing is, don't try this at home, but if you pull them apart in just the right direction, you actually end up with 2 mini 2x2s that are only slightly broken. For the sake of our mod, it shouldn't matter at all. Actually, we're only going to be able to use this one for modding because it has this part sticking out. This other one is kind of beyond repair, but you know what? That's better than having no 2x2 at all. So now all we have to do is remove these caps off all the corners and make it look like our other core. And there we go. That was my convoluted process of getting a new 2x2 core, and now back to the mod. So I guess the next step is to print out 8 of these interlocked pieces. I'm gonna change the design in one little way. I realize these arms don't need to be quite as thin and fragile anymore, so I'm gonna make them a little bit thicker so that doesn't happen. After about 10 hours of printing, we just have to clean up all those pieces, removing the supports and all of that. Then we can glue them onto the core and then add the stickers. So let's go ahead and start the time lapse. Alright, a while back, when I made the Inside Out 3x3, I thought I had reached peak hilarity for Rubik's Cube mods, but it turns out I was wrong. and I think the dangly slash jangly 2x2 now takes that crown. This thing is so utterly useless, yet at the same time, so awesome. I don't even know how to put it into words. It's as if you took a normal 2x2, started exploding it, and then froze everything into place before the pieces could totally detach. So yeah, this thing definitely looks more interesting than I was expecting. If you just ignore all the outer pieces for a second, the inside looks just like a fatter version of the world's lightest 2x2. It's the exact same size, 50 millimeters across. In fact, I actually had to sand down the inner surfaces of all the pieces in the exact same way because I was an idiot and forgot that the dimensions were a little bit too big from last time. So I designed it incorrectly in the exact same way as last time and had to fix it on the fly again. Now, if you look at these outer pieces, they're also 25 millimeter cubes, just like the inner ones. And obviously, they have these 3 solid sides that I've added some cubicle stickers to. Now, if there's anything I could change about the design, I'd probably change the size or shape of these outer pieces so that they'd actually sit flush inside of the inner pieces. So you could like tuck in all of the corners like this and make it look just like a normal Rubik's Cube. And then it would be even more hilarious when everything pops out like this into a big jangly mess. Obviously, I didn't design it that way. These pieces do not sit flush at all. But you know what? That just makes the cube even more ridiculous and even more impractical. But besides that possible design change, I'm really happy with how the actual 3D printing turned out. There is one thing though on the other side. You might be able to tell there's a lot of weird white discoloration from cutting away the support material that's actually not present on the other side. You might have seen this before on other stuff that's 3D printed, and there's a simple solution to it. Fire. So if you go ahead and look at that white spot, we hold the flame up next to it, and there we go. It's gone. So for everyone who is asking, yes, this was how I accidentally set the world's lightest 2x2 on fire multiple times. And if you give me a minute, I'm gonna go ahead and clean up this discoloration on all the rest of the pieces. And there we go. In less than a minute, you can see that this left side, which used to be super ugly, now looks identical to the other side. So there we go. That was my finishing touches on this 2x2. So I guess we might as well try out the turning. Let's do a checkerboard pattern. And unsurprisingly, it turns just like the world's lightest 2x2, maybe a little bit less catchy, a little bit smoother because of these solid, non-stickerless internals. So it might be a little hard to tell the difference, but this is in fact a checkerboard pattern. It's kind of funny because these pieces are so loose and dangly that it almost seems like they're just randomly spread out around the cube. But in fact, each one has a solid position. You can't flop 2 of them around. You can't twist a corner or anything. It really functions and solves exactly like a normal 2x2, no matter how ridiculous it looks. So let's go ahead and do a scramble and see how tricky it is to solve. And I think this might actually be a little bit tricky because it's really hard to tell when any piece is actually lined up with another piece. So let's look around the cube for any bars. Let's see. Oh, we have a red one right here. So let's go ahead and look at the other red pieces. We can insert those just like this. There we go. Now we have our red face. Looking at the other side, we have a very easy OLL like this. To get the orange side. There we go. Okay, after staring at it for a minute, I think we have this PBL, which is a lot easier to execute on a real 2x2. My fingers are literally getting stuck inside the cube as I try and execute it. And there we go. The dangly, jangly 2x2, whatever you want to call it, is solved. And speaking of whatever you call it, I haven't really decided on a great name for this cube, other than apparently the dangly, jangly 2x2. So if you have any better ideas, definitely leave those in the comments and let me know. And obviously the most important thing that everyone was wondering, how much does it weigh? Let's put it on the scale and find out. 77 grams. That's just like a normal 2x2. Wait a minute, wrong video. So yeah, that's all for this very unique 2x2. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. The Rubik's Clock is easily the strangest WCA event. Not only is it not a cube, but it also hasn't even been produced by Rubik's since it was invented in the 80s. So it might be surprising to learn that up until the year 2020, this original model of clock from the 80s was still the go-to choice for speed solving. If you went to a cubing competition at the beginning of 2020, which coincidentally I did, you would have seen all the top competitors using Rubik's brands. Even though you couldn't buy them new anymore, there just wasn't any great alternative. But all of that changed in the middle of 2020, when Qi released their fully magnetic clock. Not only did it have magnetic pins, which many people had modded their Rubik's brands to add, but the actual clock faces also snapped into place with over 200 individual magnets. This made the puzzle turn infinitely better. In fact, it turned so much better that at my last few cubing competitions, I have seen literally 0 Rubik's brands. It has gone from ubiquitous to pretty much non-existent in under 3 years, replaced entirely by the Qi clock. And you know what? Even though I appreciate the improvement in technology, I think it's a bit of a shame that this puzzle has gone out of fashion so quickly. So in this video, I want to get the best of both worlds and revive the classic look of the Rubik's Clock without sacrificing the performance of the Qi. That's right, I'm going to take my Qi clock and make it look indistinguishable from a Rubik's brand. Well, okay, I'm not going to do it with my clock. Instead, I bought another one to mod. So let's do a quick little clock unboxing here. And it looks the same as the other one. What a surprise. Comes with a nice little stand in the box, and there you go. So now the question is, how on earth do you make a Qi clock look like a Rubik's brand? Well, it's complicated because there are a lot of little differences between the two. But I think the best way to start is to take both of these puzzles apart. Now the Qi clock is pretty easy to disassemble. You just find the side with the screws on it and then unscrew all 4 screws. And now the opposite face of the clock should lift up very easily, just like that. Unfortunately though, it's not quite as easy to take apart the Rubik's clock. In fact, if you're doing it for the first time, you actually have to break this plastic seal and then tape it back together at the end. Fortunately for me though, that means all I have to do is remove this tape to get it apart. So now that we're inside, you can see that one of the biggest differences between the appearance of these two puzzles is this paper insert on the Rubik's brand, which basically just tells you what direction to align the clocks. As you can see, all of that information is just embedded into the plastic on the Qi, and if we go ahead and remove it from the Rubik's, these two puzzles start to look a lot more similar. Now unfortunately, the inserts from the Rubik's clock don't fit very well onto the Qi clock. There are a few differences in dimensions, namely the clocks are much smaller than on the Rubik's. But if we want to make this look like a Rubik's brand, we're definitely going to have to make some custom inserts for it. I think the best strategy is going to be to scan these in. There's also a different design on the other side, and then modify all the dimensions on a computer so that we can then print them out and have them fit on the Qi. I definitely have seen people at competitions who have made their own custom inserts for the Qi clock with all sorts of fancy designs, so it definitely should be possible. I'm just not sure if anyone has done it before for the Rubik's brand design. So that's step 1. And the next step is pretty similar. We need to get the actual clock faces to look identical as well. Now fortunately, you don't have to understand how the mechanism works. All you need to know is that there's 2 types of clock pieces. There's the corners, which have different colors on each side, and the rest of the pieces, which are just single colored. So step 2 is going to be to take the Qi clock faces and make them look like the Rubik's clock faces. I think it'll be pretty simple. I'm going to do it the same way as the inserts, so just scan in the design of the Rubik's, change up the dimensions a little bit, and then print them out and stick them onto these. I think the easiest way will be to print the designs on some sticker paper. That way we can attach them directly onto the pieces. The print quality might not be quite as good, but it should be super convenient. So between copying the clocks and copying these inserts, it's going to involve a lot of Photoshop work and a lot of precise cutting, especially cutting out all these little holes. But I think with a knife and some scissors, we should be able to make it work. Okay, now after those 2 steps, there are still a few more finishing touches we need to add. For one thing, if you look at the empty body of each clock, as you can see, the Rubik's is completely black, whereas the Qi is half white. So even once we add those inserts, you'll still be able to see this strip of white going all the way around the puzzle. Obviously, we don't want that, so we're gonna have to spray paint this entire white piece black. Shouldn't be too big of a deal. And the final big difference are the pins, the parts that you push up and down to make different clocks turn. Once again, we want to get the Qi pin to look just like the Rubik's pin. Now you can ignore these magnets because I glued them on myself. They're actually embedded inside the pin on the Qi. And I think what we're gonna have to do is, number 1, cut down the Qi pins a little bit because they're actually a little bit taller than the Rubik's ones. Number 2, spray paint the white part so that it'll be black on both sides, just like the Rubik's. And then number 3, add a little yellow cap on either side. The yellow cap is obviously gonna be a little bit tricky, but I think I can 3D print something to be the exact right color, shape, and size, and then glue them onto the end of the Qi. So just to review, we gotta design and cut out our own custom inserts, design and stick on some matching clock faces, spray paint some pieces, cut some stuff down, 3D print some custom caps for the pins, and then put everything together. So let's go ahead and start this time lapse. All right, we've got custom inserts, we've got custom clock faces, we've got everything that was white painted black, at least everything you can see from the outside. We've even got these really nice yellow caps for the pins to make them look just like the Rubik's brand. So let's start putting things together. We can start with the plastic casing, followed by one of these inserts. And once this is in, we can also put the black body piece right on top, followed by the actual clock pieces. Once all those are in, we can add the 4 pins into their spots. Then we take the other body piece and stick it on until everything snaps into place. We can add the other insert on top, and then the final plastic piece so that we can get everything screwed together. And here it is. Doesn't it look incredible? Well, if you've never seen an unmodified Rubik's clock before, then you might not have much to compare it to, so here's a short clip of what mine looked like before adding magnets. So pretty impressive, right? I don't think you could possibly make this thing look any more like a Rubik's brand. Here's a side-by-side comparison with my magnetic one, and as you can see, the only real difference is the size of the clock faces is a little bit smaller on this one. Obviously, there are also some slight differences in color because printing is hard, but besides that, the designs are as close as you can get to identical, and as you can see, the backside looks very good as well. If anything, the colors on mine look a little bit brighter and less faded, so I'm perfectly happy with that. Obviously, there are some slight imperfections in the cutting if you look really close up, but you'd never really notice it while solving. Moving over to the side of the puzzle, the spray-painted black plastic looks indistinguishable from the original, so that worked out great. Technically, you can still see a bit of white on the inside right there, but that's just a tiny nitpick. And finally, the one part that I'm not 100% happy with are the pins. Don't get me wrong, they look amazing. I don't think I could have possibly made them look any more like the original. The only problem is, I cut them down to make them the same size as the Rubik's, but I didn't consider why GE had longer pins in the first place. And the reason is, these pins actually travel further than the Rubik's pins, which means when they're sticking up, they're sticking further up, and when they're sticking down, they're further down. So by making them shorter, I actually made it so that when they're down, they're actually lower than the surface of the puzzle itself, which is obviously not ideal. Normally they'd be sticking up just a little bit like this. So because of that, the pins have a bit of an awkward feel because you can't really tell where they are when they're down. That was totally my fault for not considering the mechanism. I tried fixing it by adding some little washers in, like in the Rubik's clock, to make them not travel as far. But again, because the mechanism is designed differently, it just didn't work out. So we're gonna have to live with some awkward pins on this puzzle. But you guys have stared at it for long enough. I think it's finally time for the moment of truth. How does it turn? And I will say, it turns almost as well as the original GE clock. Obviously, it's gonna turn a little bit worse because we painted a bunch of pieces. We now have a bunch of paper rubbing against a bunch of plastic. But with all that considered, I'd say it still turns very well, and it's certainly the best clock in the world that looks like a Rubik's brand. Now, I guess the best thing I can do to show off the turning is to solve it. So let's go ahead and scramble it up real quick and show you a quick solve. Okay, this is the 1WCA event that I literally always hand scramble, so hopefully I didn't make it too easy. And there we go, we have a nice case on this side. 3, 2, 1, and go. Of course, we first gotta get the cross on one side, get that facing up to 12, flip it over, totally forgot what my pin order is that I was learning, get the cross on the other side, and then just match up all the corners like so. That wasn't the fastest clock solve in the world, but I think you get the idea. I'd say my really well broken in main GE clock turns maybe 50% better, whereas this thing turns easily 5 times better than my best Rubik's brand. This thing is just garbage compared to this one. But I think we can all agree that this is the absolute perfect combination if you want the looks of the Rubik's and the performance of the GE. I hope you all enjoyed the journey of making it along with me, but that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Nine years ago today, on January 26, 2014, I uploaded my first video to this channel. On that same day in 2015, I also uploaded this video. In 2016, I uploaded this video. And in 2017, this video. That's everything I've ever uploaded on January 26th. So as you can see, this screen is about to be filled with 9 little squares, each one representing a different year that I've been making videos. Also, when I say go, that date up there is gonna start advancing by 1 day every second of this video. So for example, once that date reaches July 4th, you'll be able to simultaneously see every video I've ever made on the 4th of July. Of course, I don't upload a video every single day, so you'll be able to tell when there's a new one based on a little white flash in that square. As a rule of thumb, there's gonna be a lot of white flashes in the upper part of the screen, so a high quantity of videos in the early years, whereas hopefully you can tell that the quality improves down in the later years. Also, this is roughly my 1000th video, so happy 9th birthday to Z3 Cubing, happy 1000 videos, I hope you all enjoy, and go. This is a 3x3 Pyraminx, or at least that's what I'm going to call it because it has 1, 2, 3 layers. Over the years, I've assembled quite the collection of force cubes, from the transparent plastic 3x3s with transparent stickers, all the way to the 12 very time-consuming Megaminxes. But I think my favorite project of them all has to be the shiny 3x3 force cubes, just because the end product looks so good. If you don't know, these were made by taking 6 of these Cyclone Boys metallic 3x3s, taking them all apart, and then reassembling them into one color per cube. So for example, the 6 white sides come together to make this one fully white cube. And that's why, when I saw that Cyclone Boys had released a new 2x2 metallic cube, I knew that these were going to be my next set of force cubes. And so, I went ahead and bought all 6 of them that I need to make force cubes out of. I'm still a big fan of these Lego-like boxes, by the way. They're pretty fun. Of course, these being mostly decorative, it makes absolutely no sense to buy the more expensive magnetic versions, which is why I paid $16 per cube to get the magnetic versions. I'm a genius. Fortunately, you guys can save a bit of that money by using discount code Z3Cubing for 5% off at thecubicle.com, link in the description. But without further ado, let's go ahead and start the time lapse. And here are the finished Force 2x2s. Just like last time, I could not be happier with how these turned out. Something about the metallic finish just makes these cubes look like they were meant to be solid colored. Once again, we have gold, silver, and bronze on this side, and then R, G, and B on this side. And I just cannot get over how good they look. I guess that's good compensation for the fact that the turning is not so great. It seems to have a perfectly good speed cube mechanism, and in fact most of the time it works just fine, but every once in a while you get these weird lockups, like the internal pieces are kind of catching on each other, and it just makes it really annoying to play around with. Now the tensions did come pretty loose on all of these cubes, so maybe that could be solved somewhat by tightening those down, but in essence, you should buy one of these cubes because it looks cool and not to speed cube on it. Now if you're curious, the process of making these was very straightforward, just like the 3x3s were. The trickiest part was probably just dealing with taking apart and reassembling a bunch of 2x2s. The way that I did it was just to unscrew one side and use that to take the first few pieces out and put the last few pieces back in. So once I had it completely disassembled, I went ahead and took all the caps off all the pieces. It's pretty easy. I just stuck a knife right underneath here and then pulled up. You just got to make sure you're applying force in the correct direction. And then once all the caps are off of all the pieces, you can go ahead and start putting them back on, except this time matching them up so you have one unique color per cube. And that's the essence of making force cubes. Now while we're here, I think it'd be fun to try making some patterns by swapping the pieces around between different cubes. I've done this on some of my other force cubes, like this checkerboard pattern on the 4x4 here. I think the checkerboard will look really cool on these, but before I do that, I want to try out one more thing. I'm just going to use these 4 colors here, and I want to make it so that you have 4 different bars, one of each color, running down the cube. I think that'd look pretty cool, so let's try it out. Ta-da! I don't know why I bothered putting together all 4 of them because they're literally identical, but hey, I think they look really cool. In fact, I think they might look a little bit nicer if we get the opposite colors away from each other like this. I guess there's no need to have all 4 of them here, so I guess I'll show off just one. It's a little bit hard to show you all the colors on camera because of the harsh lighting, but I promise it looks really nice in person. So now I'm just curious what it's like to solve. I'm guessing really easy, but let's find out. So I guess that's probably scrambled enough, and it looks like we already have 2 bars, so let's match those up. And now we have a checker pattern on the top. So I guess we can swap 2 pieces around using like a J-perm. Here we go. Again, the cube is a little bit catchy, and there we go. It's basically solved. That was incredibly easy. I guess here's sort of an alternate look of this cube where everything is kind of checkered. That also looks pretty cool. And speaking of checkered, let's bring all these cubes back out and make them all checkered. I think that'll be the coolest looking pattern. And check it out. I know it's not quite a checkerboard pattern, but it still looks pretty cool. And most importantly, you can just do this, and then this, and there you go. You have a checkerboard pattern. So here's the white and yellow one. Let's do that with one of each color of cube here. So here is the red and orange one. Looks pretty cool too. And here's the green and blue. Yeah, I think I may just keep the cubes like this because they look very cool. In fact, I also happen to have a matching set of shiny 3x3s right here. And I think I might want to do a checker pattern on these ones too. Let's try it. Now that is a checkerboard. Check these out. If these aren't the coolest checkered 3x3s you've ever seen, then I don't know what is. The funny thing about these ones is you can turn them as much as you want and they will always be checkered because all the edges are the same color and so are the corners. That's of course different from the 2x2s where you can sort of scramble them up. Let's try it. There we go. And now we can solve it by doing one turn. That was so difficult. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of these matching sets of force cubes, and I really hope that Cyclone Boys continues to make more metallic cubes like this in the future, because I would totally buy them and make more force cubes. Imagine a 4x4 or a Scube or a Pyraminx in shiny colors, or what about a Megaminx? That would be insanely expensive, but insanely awesome to make 12 different shiny Megaminx force cubes. But yeah, those are my new force 2x2s, immediately one of my new favorites. I just wish they didn't get so many fingerprints all over the place. That'd be nice. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you all like the look of these as much as I do. That's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to create the world's lightest 2x2. This is the world's lightest 3x3 Rubik's Cube, coming in at just 26 grams. Except for this one that's made out of paper and weighs just 10 grams, or this one that weighs just 1 gram. Except I think it's kind of cheating to call something the lightest 3x3 just because it's really small. So I think we should narrow our definition down to the lightest standard size 3x3. And while this paper cube is pretty cool, being made out of paper means that it is infinitely more fragile, not to mention way more difficult to turn than its plastic counterpart. That's why I also like to narrow things down to the realm of just plastic cubes. Now with those requirements in mind, it got me thinking. If the lightest 3x3 we can make is 26 grams, then what about the lightest 2x2? This is a relatively lightweight 2x2 speed cube from GAN, coming in at just 56 grams. So surely we'd be able to modify this to be under 26 grams, right? Well, maybe, but it's not quite that simple. Of course, that is how I made the lightest 3x3, was by taking a standard speed cube and just cutting a bunch of holes in it until I had removed most of the plastic. Now, unfortunately, I don't think this technique would be nearly as effective on a 2x2. Even though it's a smaller cube that looks a little bit simpler, on the inside, the mechanism is actually just as complicated, if not more so, than on a 3x3, and that means there's a lot of little hidden pieces that you really can't save much weight just by poking holes into, at least without compromising the mechanism. To prove that point, here's what the core of this exact 2x2 looks like. Now we could probably shave off a little bit of weight, like by removing the magnets, but for the most part, we're stuck with this entire thing if we want the cube to still function. And on its own, the core of this 2x2 weighs over 21 grams. That means by the time we add on all these outer pieces with the holes in them, the cube will probably weigh upwards of 30 or 40 grams, which is just way too heavy. So if we want to make the world's lightest 2x2, we're gonna have to come up with a new strategy. Now on my video about this cube, I got a lot of comments asking, why didn't you just 3D print the pieces? It'd be a lot less manual labor, and you could probably make the pieces even lighter. Now at the time, I was pretty hesitant. I had done a lot of 3D printing before, and I was pretty confident that it would be impossible to make pieces this thin and intricate, at least on a standard household 3D printer. Now I stand behind my statements, and I still believe that modding was the way to go for the world's lightest 3x3, and not 3D printing, at least unless you have a really fancy 3D printer. But I think for the world's lightest 2x2, 3D printing might actually be able to solve some of our problems. Now we've already established that the core of a standard size 2x2 is way too big and heavy for our needs, so what if we just started with a smaller 2x2? Of course, this little cube is already a lot lighter than this big one, but keep in mind the requirement that our world's lightest 2x2 has to be the same size as a standard one. And by the way, that standard size is around 50 millimeters, so that'll be our minimum goal. So what does the core of this little mini 2x2 look like? Well, if you remove all the outer corner pieces, this is what you get. You can think of this mechanism kind of just like a 3x3. We have these circular centers, these flat edges, and then the only thing you can actually see on the final cube is what's attached to these big corners on the outside. So this little tiny thing in my hands makes for a fully functional 2x2, and the best part is, it only weighs just over 4 grams. That is nothing compared to a standard 2x2 core. So here's my plan to make the world's lightest 2x2. Start with a super lightweight 2x2 core, and then expand it out with some really lightweight plastic pieces until we reach that magic 50 millimeters. And what better way to make plastic extensions in a very specific shape than with 3D printing? Keep in mind the big difference from last time is that we're not actually printing the mechanism. We already have it right here. That's why this time, we don't have to worry about printing really intricate pieces or the plastic not being strong enough. We have all the intricate, precise stuff right here. We're basically just gonna build a facade on top of it to get it up to the correct size. And so, I started 3D modeling and printing some prototypes. So this was my first attempt right here. Basically, this is like one sticker of the cube. You would have 4 of them per side, glued on right here, 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 and here. So you can see I've made it completely hollow to minimize the amount of plastic, with just enough surface area on the outer face to be able to hold onto the puzzle. And by doing it just one sticker at a time, rather than the entire piece, which would be made up of 3 of these, we can actually print in 6 different colors of filament, and then basically glue 3 of these together to make one piece, and basically end up with a stickerless design. Now, because you're gluing 3 of these together, you actually don't need all these supports. In fact, you can get rid of 3 of these big arms and just leave this one little one to hold up this square here. And so I went ahead and printed a bunch more prototypes to try and get something along these lines. I had a lot of problems with printing, as you can see here, but eventually I came up with this design, which for some reason consistently printed the best out of all of them. So this became the final version of the design, and I started printing out a bunch more copies. Later on, I realized there were a few more spots where I could remove a bit more plastic, so I just did that with a knife, and eventually I created my first full extended 2x2 piece. As you can see, 3 of these glued together gives you this. So hopefully if you didn't understand it before, you can now see how a bunch of these pieces will eventually build up the scaffolding of a full-size 2x2. Of course, each piece will have 3 different colors on it. Instead of just all being white, it'll be like white, and then red, and then green. And so in order to print in all the different colors of a Rubik's Cube, I went ahead and bought an assorted set of a bunch of different colors of 3D printing filament from Amazon, and then I chose out of that the 6 colors that look most like a Rubik's Cube, as you can see right here. So with the filament and the designs in hand, let's go ahead and start the 3D printing time-lapse. So after almost 8 hours of closely monitoring and messing with the printer, here are the results. I will say I've never printed in Rubik's Cube colored plastic before, and I love the way it looks, all these colors together. So now what we have to do is take all 24 of these and turn them into these. Basically what that entails is peeling them all off of these rafts, which basically just help everything stick to the 3D printer bed a little bit better. And then removing all the supports, which basically just help things print properly when there's overhangs. And then we can do the painstaking part of taking a knife and cutting down all that excess plastic to get it to the very minimal design that we have right here. So let's go ahead and start the time lapse. Alright, so here are all of the cut down pieces. I still have one more spot where I want to remove a bit more extra plastic, but we're going to wait to do that until after the next step, which is breaking out the super glue and gluing the pieces together. Basically, we just grab 3 matching pieces like these, put super glue on all of these 45-degree angles where they touch, and then glue them together into one big corner piece like this. And then once we have all these combinations of corner pieces glued together, I'm going to do that little bit of extra cutting I was talking about earlier, and then we can glue each one onto the core of our 2x2, just like this prototype one right here. And after that, our full-size 2x2 should hopefully be complete. I'm still not certain that all the pieces will fit together properly around the core, and we'll have to wait and see if the cube actually still turns properly, but I'm crossing my fingers, and hopefully it turns out to be incredibly light. So let's start the final time lapse. Alright, and here is the result. Now, I don't know about you, but as I was putting this together, I was just blown away at how good it looks. Of course, I have the arguably more impressive 3x3 to compare it to, but something about the simplicity of this one, especially with the black core that all the corners are just holding onto, just makes it look really cool. Of course, it was not without its challenges, and if you add up all the time I spent designing pieces and actively tending to the 3D printer, and of course cutting everything down to make it functional and pretty, I'm sure it far exceeds the 12 hours I spent modding this cube. I guess the biggest challenge I had was, after gluing together all the corner pieces, I realized they were ever so slightly too big to fit together while glued onto the core, and so I spent another hour or two off camera just carefully sanding down all the sides of every piece, which I guess this does make it a little bit lighter, but it was a lot of work, and now everything looks a little bit more crooked than it used to. And I won't get into the other challenges, like how I accidentally set it on fire a couple times, but let's just say I put a lot of effort into making it look good. But of course, looks are not everything. The cube still has to be fully functional, and is it? Well, It seems to turn just fine in every layer, and I'm actually pretty impressed with the way it turns. I was a little bit worried because the 2x2 I started with is a little bit catchy, and yeah, this thing isn't going to set any corner cutting records, but I will say that if anything, adding the extensions actually made the cube turn a little bit better. It almost lets you align the layers a little bit more precisely. I also added a drop of lubrical silk, and I think that helped it out a little bit too. So now that the cube is all scrambled up, let's go ahead and try a quick solve. So 3, 2, 1, and go. I will say that the skeletal nature of the pieces means that it can be a little bit tricky to turn, and that combined with the poor turning of the original cube means that this thing isn't exactly a speed cube, but at the same time, it works perfectly fine for a casual solve. Also, I just accidentally did CLL, oops. I'll also say that I was pleasantly surprised at how sturdy these pieces felt, especially after gluing the 3 colors of each one together, and so I was ultimately able to cut down these thin sections to be even thinner than I originally thought, saving a bit more weight. So I guess 3D printing is actually a bit more feasible than I thought as a way to produce puzzles, at least in terms of strength. I would still be very concerned about producing the intricate details like in a 3x3 mechanism, at least on the cheap 3D printer that I use, but perhaps I'll be more open to making more cool 3D printed stuff like this in the future. But I know there's still one more burning question on all of your minds. How much does it weigh? Well, first let's make sure it meets all the other requirements for the world's lightest 2x2. You've already seen that it's fully functional. It's made out of plastic, the plastic core plus the 3D printed pieces, and it is the same size as a normal 2x2, as you can see here. It's pretty much exactly 50 inches, as you can see. So let's break out the scale and see how much it weighs. Just to remind you, a normal 2x2 weighs 57 grams, and the world's lightest 3x3 weighs just 26, whereas the world's lightest 2x2 comes in at just 13 grams. Yes, that is basically half of the world's lightest 3x3. I really could not be happier with this weight. This one really just feels like a feather, even compared to the 3x3. Here is the equivalent in tungsten cubes. In fact, these 3 little cubes weigh more than this entire fully functional 2x2. Even compared to the little tiny 2x2 we started with, there's only about a 5-gram difference, despite adding on all this 3D printed plastic and making it so much bigger than this one is. So yeah, I believe this is now the world's lightest 2x2, at least according to those pretty straightforward requirements, and it makes a great companion alongside my world's lightest 3x3 here. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the process of making this fun cube, and stay tuned for more like it in the future. How about the world's heaviest 2x2? That's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Today is December 31st, 2022. But in about 40 minutes, as you can see there, the clock will tick over and it'll become 2023. So to start off the new year of 2023, I figured why not celebrate by solving the 2x2x3. It's basically the same thing if you just ignore the 0. But to make for an exciting video, we're gonna need more than just this one 2x2x3. And so that's why I went ahead and bought 500 2x2x3s, and we're gonna see how many I can solve in the first 20 minutes and 23 seconds of 2023. Wait a minute, where'd the 500 2x2x3s go? Did I only order 5? Well, that's a problem. I can't waste all my time re-scrambling them all. I guess I'm gonna have to recruit someone to help me. Tim? Okay, so I guess this is my designated scrambler, Tim.
Hi.
So every time I solve a 2x2x3, it'll be your job to scramble it back up again, so I always have a fresh supply of scrambled ones. And now that I think about it, the year 2022 sounds a lot like 2x2x2. So why not spend the last 20 minutes and 22 seconds of 2022 solving 2x2s? That means we need to start the 2x2x2 relay at 11:39 p.m. and 38 seconds. As you can see right here on the official time.gov website, that clock behind us is perfectly synced up to the real time. And after 20 minutes and 22 seconds of 2x2x2s, the year will switch over to 2023, and so we will switch over to 2x2x3s, this time for 20 minutes and 23 seconds. Okay, so I think the time starts in about 5 seconds, so 3, 2, 1, and let's start with the 2x2. So this will be my first of the last 2x2s of 2022, and we got BBL. Oh, that was really slow, that was like 10 seconds. Go ahead and scramble that up. So that's 2x2 number 1. Okay, my 2x2 solving pace is picking up a little bit from that first one, and that is 2x2 number 5 right there, so I've made it through all of them. Tim is doing a good job scrambling, and it is still 11:40, so we have a lot more time and a lot more 2x2s to go. Okay, so I guess once I do this, that is 20.22 2x2s. That's pretty cool. So let's move on. Okay, working on cube 50 right here. Complete. We're actually going at a pretty good pace here. My fingers are getting a little bit tired. How's it going, Tim?
About the same.
Oh, and the time just changed over. It has been
72.
10 minutes. That was 72 cubes, so about 7 cubes per minute. That's not too bad. A little less than 10 seconds per cube. Fun fact, it takes about 14 minutes to solve
100.
2x2s. I would have thought it took a little bit longer than that, but yeah, 14 minutes. And with that, New Year's is in about 10 seconds, so let's count down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and just in time.
143.
143 cubes, and let's move on to the 2x2x3s. So, I guess it's time for me to solve my first one. I haven't done one of these for a while, so hopefully I remember how to do it. It's like a square one. Okay, so I know this case. It's a fun one like that, and then middle there, and there it should be solved. Ta-da! Oh, and Happy New Year, by the way. I forgot to say that. So I've already finished 10 2x2x3s in 2023. In fact, this one will be number 11. Before I started, I was actually kind of wondering which one would be faster, 2x2 or 2x2x3, and I figured out very quickly the answer is 2x2 because these are going a lot slower, which Tim can probably attest to. He's getting a lot more time to scramble them.
It's very nice.
Oh, that one wasn't solved. Give me that back. There we go. Actual 17. Not trying to cheat. Okay, I feel like I am getting the hang of this cube, doing it a little bit faster than I was at the beginning, remembering the algorithms and everything. I will say this cube obviously has more pieces than a 2x2, but it's not really any more difficult than a 2x2. In fact, in many ways, it's a little bit easier, a little bit less to know about it, but it is definitely still a little bit slower.
50.
Already 12 minutes in? Oh my gosh, we're gonna get nowhere close to 142 this time. Whoa, those are some fireworks, nice. All right, the time is now 12:20, which means we have, I think, currently around 10 seconds left of solving cubes, so can I get this last one in? What number was that, Tim?
76.
Okay. Oh, we have 5 more seconds, and, no, okay. After all this time, I still haven't figured out how to do this opposite one properly. So 76 2x2x3s in the first 2023 of 2023. That's like basically half of what we did in 2x2s, so I guess a 2x2x3 is twice as difficult as a 2x2. Like I was saying earlier, I actually am a little bit surprised because the 2x2x3 is basically just 2 of the easiest steps on a square one, but then again, I practice a lot more 2x2 than I do square one, so I guess that makes sense. Now Tim, which one did you like better, 2x2x2 or 2x2x3?
2x2x3.
Yeah, I guess I gave you a lot more time to scramble those. A little bit less stressful. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed that fun little relay. 2023 of 2x2x3s in 2023. And that's pretty much it. See you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. I just had a crazy idea for a mod. What if you took a 3x3 and made it look like it was turned inside out? Let me explain. Think of it like this. Every piece on a Rubik's Cube kind of has 2 halves to it. You have the outer half with the flat sides that you can normally see, and then you have the inner half with the mechanism that you normally can't see. But what if we just got rid of the normal outside part and made it so that you actually can see the inside part sticking out of the puzzle like this. Now this looks really cool, but of course we don't want the edge piece to just sort of be hanging around like this. We actually want it to still be a fully functional part of the puzzle. That means we're going to need to have the mechanism not only on the outside like this, but also on the inside. We're essentially going to have to duplicate this on both halves of the edge piece. Now imagine we do that not just with this edge, but with all 12 edges on the cube. So it's still a fully functional Rubik's Cube, but now all 12 edges look like they're sort of inside out. And we don't just have to stop with the edges. We can also turn the corners and the centers inside out as well. Just to give you an idea of what it might look like, here it is with just one edge and one corner. So imagine this all over the cube. Just to be clear, this mod serves absolutely no practical purpose, but it should look very cool. And if you're at all confused at this point in the video, don't worry because it'll all make sense very soon. So let's get started. Now the tricky part about this mod is that we want the mechanism to be sticking out of the cube like this in order to look cool, but we also still need the mechanism on the inside of the puzzle in order for the cube to function. So that means we're actually going to need two identical cubes so that we have two mechanisms to work with. Now the thing is, these two cubes aren't exactly identical. This is a Chi Warrior W that I bought, whereas this is a slightly older Chi cube that someone flipped around the color scheme on and gave to me. But the thing is, the pieces are pretty much identical, and the really nice thing about this cube is that the insides of the center pieces are actually colored. So you see the green one is green, the red one is red, etc. Whereas on most cubes, they're all just primary plastic, and so this will come into play later in the mod. So just to reiterate what we're doing, we're going to be taking matching pieces from each cube and basically merging them together so that we have a mechanism on both sides. So it's like this crazy two-headed edge piece. One of the mechanisms sticking into the cube, making sure that the puzzle still functions, and one of the mechanisms sticking out of the cube just to look cool. So how do we make this a reality? Well, I guess the easiest way is to cut both edge pieces in half and then glue them together. So let's try it. Okay, so here are the two halves, and here's how they fit together. It's not perfect. I think I overdid the sanding a little bit on one of the halves, but it is pretty good. So let's glue them together and see what happens. Okay, I think that's stuck together pretty well. So let's pop it into our original cube and see what it looks like. And there we go. So hopefully this mod should make a little more sense now. This edge is a fully functional part of the cube, but it also looks like it's inside out. Awesome, right? I was a little bit worried about this seam where the two pieces are glued together being visible and ugly from the outside, but honestly, I don't think it looks too bad, so I'm pretty happy with how this first piece turned out. And the really fun thing about this now is we can pop the piece out and then flip it around and put it back in. And the cube is still fully functional and still the same as it was before. So that's kind of the fun novelty of this idea. We have the same mechanism on the outside as we have on the inside. Now, unfortunately, when we move on to the corners, things are not quite as simple as they were on the edges. As you can see, when we have an edge in here, it looks just like a normal stickerless piece, where there's one color on one side and one color on the other side. Whereas when we stick a corner in here, it's not quite as simple, because as you can see, there's two colors everywhere where you normally just have one. So there's no easy way to fix this. We're kind of going to just have to live with it. But there is one thing we can do to make it look a little bit more consistent. As you can see right now, we have white next to white, green next to green, but then red kind of off in the middle of nowhere. And so to fix this, we can actually just take apart this corner piece and then swap around the color scheme like this. So now it makes a little bit more sense because we have green next to green, white next to white, and red next to red. It's just that each color is a little bit offset from where you'd expect it to be. That's fine though. The cube will still be solvable just like normal. The colors will just be slightly in the wrong spot. So now we have to think about how we're going to cut these corner pieces in half and then glue them back together. It's a lot more complicated than with the edges because the geometry is different. Rather than just chopping them straight in half, we actually have to do a zigzag cut all the way around like this. That way, we'll be preserving just these three sides of each cubie. And so if you imagine these three sides on both halves, they will nicely fit together right back into a cube. Let me show you what I mean. So here's both halves of the corner. I had to do some very careful sanding to make sure that they fit together perfectly, like that. And here's what I was talking about with the colors not quite lining up. As you can see, they do match, so we have red to red, white to white, and green with green. But of course, it has to be a little bit wonky because we have two colors here where there'd normally be just one. Anyway, let's go ahead and get out the super glue, glue it together, and see what happens. Ta-da! Now let's stick this into the cube and see what it looks like. Now, unlike the edge piece, we do actually have to make sure that we put the right end into the puzzle, otherwise the color scheme will be incorrect. So here it is with one edge and one corner inside out. That is amazing. And I guess the plus side of doing this with a corner is if you have an identical cube, you can stick it in like this and make some fused cubes. Obviously, that is not the goal of this mod. We're going for totally impractical, but cool looking. And so the one piece left that we haven't talked about is the centers. These are going to be a little bit tricky. If we go ahead and unscrew a centerpiece from the sacrificial puzzle, that'll give you an idea of what it'll look like for a centerpiece to be inside out. There we go. Obviously, I don't think we want it to be sticking that far out of the cube, so I'm definitely going to be cutting this down, possibly also cutting the existing centerpiece down. I think I might also be able to get it so that this piece fits onto the existing center as if it's a center cap, so kind of snapping on like this. We'll have to wait and see if I'm clever enough to do that. Also, hopefully it's now obvious why we need the centerpieces to be the same color all the way down. So the green center needs to be all green because you're going to be seeing that color sticking out. But I think you guys understand how the mod works now, so let's just jump into the time lapse and modify all 26 pieces. This might take a while. And here are the finished pieces of the inside-out Rubik's Cube. As usual, that took way longer than I expected. I didn't film every single step, but it took something on the order of 5 hours. The edges and corners went exactly like I planned, and as you can see, I came up with a nice solution for the centerpieces where they sort of snap on just like this. It's definitely not the nicest looking mod I've ever made, especially on these corners. It's very hard to get these gaps to line up just right and look nice, but I'm fairly happy with how it turned out. Oh, and also, my fingers feel like they're now entirely coated in super glue, so that's fun. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and get this cube assembled. And there we go. Oh my gosh. I knew this thing was gonna look ridiculous, but I was not prepared for just how ridiculous it was going to be. I don't even know what to say. I love it. It's a masterpiece, a work of art. I just couldn't stop laughing as I put it together. Like, it's just so much funnier looking than I thought it would be. I guess one thing that really surprised me is how big it is from corner to corner. Because these corners stick out so much, it's like basically the size of a 9x9. It's not that bulky to hold in your hand, but it definitely sticks out a lot and takes up a lot of room. So I guess let's do some first turns on it. And yeah, it turns just fine. The cube to begin with wasn't that great, but it definitely turns about as well as it used to. So let's do something like a checkerboard pattern and see how interesting it looks. And yeah, that is definitely a checkerboard pattern. The corners definitely mess with the aesthetic a little bit. You kind of have some colors leaking in that shouldn't quite be there. Again, that's kind of just a fact of life because of the geometry of the corners. You couldn't really fix it without like custom molding your own plastic pieces. I thought about doing a black plastic version and then just stickering the insides of the pieces, but I felt like it was more pure to just go with the base colors of the stickerless parts. A few other things I've noticed. These center caps work very well. You have a nice little handle for pulling them off. You can see the screw down underneath, and you can stick it right back on. It fits in perfectly, and you can just barely see the screw right down the middle. Also, if you look closely, you can definitely see the roughness of the seams of the corners that I was talking about. There's even a few places where the plastic is a little bit bent, which is kind of ugly. But just looking at the overall aesthetic of the cube, you can very easily look past those little imperfections. So I guess let's scramble this up and see how difficult it is to solve. The few things that I think might make it a little bit tricky are, one, just holding the cube. It's a little bit awkward when you have these mechanism parts sticking out. And the main thing is just going to be color recognition on the corners. Because you don't have one color facing up, it's going to be a little bit tricky to tell when a corner is oriented correctly. Although a quick trick you can do if you want to figure out what color this piece is just look to the inside of the puzzle, and so here you can tell that it should be blue. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started. I have a feeling the cross is going to be very easy because the edges and centers are very obvious. So yeah, 3, 2, 1, and go. Very nice and easy to put these pieces in just like we normally would. Just a little bit more difficult to turn the cube. And now going on to the corners is going to be a little bit tricky. So I see this F2L pair right here. Let's go ahead and put this in. And I did get that oriented correctly, so that's good. Moving on to the next one. I had to stare at this for a second to figure out what F2L case it is, but I think I figured it out. And hopefully this will work correctly. And there we go, it is inserted correctly. This one right here is, I think, this F2L case, so let's put it in. And nope, I oriented it wrong, so let's try that again. Oh, I put it in wrong the other direction, so let's try that a third time. And here we go, third time's a charm. We got that F2L pair in. This one right here should be pretty easy. Just pop it out like that and put it in. And there we go, F2L is complete. Now I think I recognize what this OLL is, but I don't think I'm gonna be able to do it from muscle memory. So I'm just gonna do the basic beginner's method, and that is an anti-soon. Just like that. There we go. Now onto PLL. We have a block right here I can see. Is that a V-perm? Oh my gosh, it's a V-perm. Let's see if I can muscle memory a V-perm on this thing. And There we go, the cube is solved. That wasn't very hard, except for the orientation of the corners, which is a bit of a shame, but you know what, I think the cube still looks pretty good, and that just makes it look a little bit more unique. So yeah, I hope you've all enjoyed this crazy idea of a mod as much as I've enjoyed making it. If you have any equally crazy ideas, be sure and let me know, but that's pretty much it, and I'll see you guys next time. Hey guys, and welcome back to Z3 Cubing. Today I'm going to show you the hidden side of my Rubik's Cube collection. 1 year ago, I released my latest Rubik's Cube collection, a video over an hour long talking about every single puzzle that I own. Except that's not exactly true. In addition to the nearly 500 puzzles that I consider part of my cube collection, there's also over 50 of them that don't quite make the cut for one reason or another. I'll talk about what those reasons are throughout the video, but I figured since they're all still here taking up room on my shelf, why not dedicate just this one video to show them to you? We'll start up here with a handful of cubes that I don't consider part of my cube collection because, well, they're not mine. The first cube up is the Shengshao Aurora. Perhaps the only decent speed cube in this video, but it's actually my brother's. He was with me at my very first cubing competition, US Nationals 2014, and due to an extreme amount of boredom, I guess he convinced our mom to buy this cube for him, and proceeded basically never to use it, and he never went to a cubing competition again. Now this is an old Rubik's brand from the 80s, and it's actually my dad's. As you can see, it has an old terrible color scheme, one of the sides of stickers is missing, and it was probably the first Rubik's Cube that I ever used, long before I knew how to solve one. This is a much newer Rubik's brand, also my brother's. I guess when he was little, he got me to put a set of CubeSmith tiles on this cube for him, basically a super premium set of stickers, and then years later, I pulled them all off to put them on a more modern cube and make a fun video, and I still don't think he's found out about it. This is another somewhat old Rubik's brand that's actually my sister's. She actually did learn how to solve a cube on this, possibly before I learned, although clearly she didn't get quite as into it as I did. Next up, we're going to be moving on to the rest of my Rubik's brand puzzles that are all just way too random to consider part of my collection. First, we have this specialty Rubik's 3x3 with like some mountains on the back. I think the origin story of this one is some of my family found it while out geocaching, and they brought it back home to me. Now here's where the really weird ones start. This is the Rubik's Revolution. It's not actually a real twisty puzzle, it's actually just an electronic toy with little light up buttons in the middle, and let's see if it still works. Apparently. This is another old electronic puzzle that doesn't even attempt to look like a Rubik's Cube. It's called the Rubik's Slide. Basically, it has these light up tiles, as you can see. You can slide it around to play different games. This is the Rubik's 360. Basically, you have 6 colored balls down in the middle, and you have to spin the puzzle in just the right way to get them through a series of holes in these rotating spheres and into the correct spots on the outside, and then lock them in. I'm sure there's a strategy for it, but I was never able to figure it out as a kid. This is the Rubik's Twist, also called the Rubik's Snake. Basically, it starts out as one long chain of these triangular pieces, and then you have to get it back into this shape or any number of other shapes. It's actually kind of fun to play around with. These are basically the same thing as the last one, except it's a much newer version that's a little bit smaller and comes with 2 of them. That way you can put them together and make much more crazy shapes. Rubik's actually sent these to me while I was trying out the Rubik's Phantom. I didn't make a video about them, but they are a lot of fun. And while we're on that subject, here's the other product that Rubik's, or more accurately, Spin Master, sent to me. I haven't actually tried it out, but I think basically it's different shaped pieces like this that can go together and make a cube, but then you can also make a bunch of different shapes out of them. And so you can like choose a card, and then because there's 2 of them, you can then race your friends to see who can make it the fastest. Let me know if you want me to try it out on the channel. And back to the other side with another newish Rubik's brand product, the Rubik's Edge. Basically this looks to me like a super floppy cube. Someone gave it to me, I don't remember exactly who, but it's actually super convenient because I modded my old super floppy cube into a barrel. So I guess now I have a new one branded by Rubik's. Cool. This is definitely one of the most classic non-cubic Rubik's brand puzzles, Rubik's Magic. Basically the goal is to take these 3 rings and then flip it around like this so that the 3 rings become connected. This was actually a WCA event for quite a long time, until everyone realized how useless it was. Now this is a very old puzzle called the Missing Link, which my grandma gave to me. I don't think it was actually branded under Rubik's, but I think like the same company made it or something. And obviously the goal is to twist and slide to get all the colors matched up, and clearly it wasn't that difficult because I managed to solve it. Okay, now before we move on to the next row, let's do a quick intermission to talk about my cubes that are shaped like letters. This first one is not fully functional. In fact, it's not functional at all. It's really just a block of wood, and I painted it to look like a Rubik's Cube. I think it looks pretty cool, correct color scheme and everything, and apparently I made it in 2015. The initials are wrong though, that should be Z3 for Zalix Throcker. Here's one that you might recognize, the 3D printed Z3 cube. It is fully functional, but I haven't been showing it off recently because it's broken. I broke it to make what is now the most popular video on my channel, and I've been meaning to make a new one, but haven't gotten around to it. And I guess that's a good transition into the next few cubes, which are ones that are just broken for one reason or another. This first one is a Shengshou 5x5 that's apparently missing some center caps. I had to sacrifice this entire blue center for a mod that I was working on. I broke one of the centers, the broken one is still in there, which is just barely holding it together. This is a half-finished 4x4 mod, which I gave up on years ago because apparently I was really bad at modding. Basically, it's a cutter cube, so you have to turn the middle layers 45 degrees like this before the rest of the cube is able to turn. And up until a couple years ago, it was actually sitting in pieces before I realized that I could probably just assemble it and have it as a half-working, half-finished mod. This is an old 1x1x2, which predates pretty much everything in this video, other than my dad's old 3x3. It barely has a mechanism, it's basically just plastic rubbing against plastic, and evidently our dog chewed it up at one point. These next few cubes are in a very niche category of things that fans have given to me at cubing competitions. First, we have a generic cube that has my name on it, so shout out to whoever gave this to me. This next one isn't really a cube, but it looks like one. It's actually a pretty cool little display piece that someone gave to me, made out of these little melty bead things. And here's one that someone gave to me just last week. It's a mini 3x3 with this little ribbon attached, I think designed to be a Christmas ornament. And that's a good transition into the rest of my mini 3x3s, which aren't part of my collection because they're just so cheap and terrible. And to demonstrate that point, we have this first one here, which has even more wrong of a color scheme, and it turns absolutely terrible. This was originally the same type of mini 3x3, but I replaced the stickers and added some lube, making it turn actually kind of okay, except the stickers were terrible, so the lube seeped into all of them and all the centers fell off. And here's another one of the same cubes that's just missing stickers entirely. Don't ask me why it exists, I have no idea. These next two are Angry Birds themed mini 3x3s that still turn equally terrible, so that's interesting. Here's another terrible mini 3x3 sticker mod thing. I think I know the story behind this one. It was like some prize for a fundraising goal for something in middle school, and so obviously I got exactly to that level of money and then gave up. Here's another one that I think might have been from some school event in like high school, but honestly I have no idea where it came from. Aerospace.org, apparently. And now moving on to the rest of my terrible sticker mods, now full size though. Should be pretty obvious why I don't include these in my collection. This is a football cube, which has the unique property of having to orient the centers, just like any picture cube, but also since all the centers are identical, it kind of acts as a void cube, so you can get parity. But I got this at like a town fair one time, I spent a few dollars on it and then promptly realized how terrible it was. It looks like I did try and lube it though with CRC silicone. This is a sparkly cube that I think my mom gave to me at some point, so let's open it up and see what it's like. It actually is pretty cool, those sparkles. Oh my gosh, that is terrible. Now this is a sheep themed cube that I got when I was in Ireland. It's definitely one of the better themed cubes that I have. It's actually Rubik's branded, so it turns slightly less terrible than the rest of them. And from that same trip, here's a much worse turning one that just says Ireland on every side. Here's an oddly specific specialty cube that I got from this like indoor swimming pool / hot spring place in South Dakota. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it was pretty cool. This is a super old Sudoku cube, I think from around the same time as that 1x1x2, and evidently our dog also got a hold of this one, and it has the unique distinction of just smelling like old plastic and trying to break every time you touch it. Now, if you remember the other Sudoku cube from my videos, which I recently smashed, I think this came in a set of like 4 terrible picture cubes, including this one right here, which I guess shows various types of Girl Scout cookies. Most of the stickers have fallen off. And milk, apparently. But strangely, this snake cube is the one of those 4 cubes that actually had kind of decent stickers that have stayed on over the years. It still turns equally terrible though. And this Rubik's cube, well, it's not a Rubik's Cube, it's a stress ball that I think my friend Tim gave to me. Okay, we're gonna start off the final row with some other miscellaneous mini cubes. These first 2 are mods that I made out of the aforementioned terrible mini 3x3s. These are 2 different versions of Siamese cubes, so basically different ways of fusing 2 cubes together, and they're actually kind of fun to solve even if they are terrible looking. Now you may remember from my cube collection that I had a single mini 2x2, double fused 2x2, as well as a triple and a quadruple version, but in addition to that, I also at one point bought a bunch of these double fused mini 2x2s, basically because these mini 2x2s are just really nice for making mods out of. And to illustrate that point, these are 2 of the cores of some of those same mini 2x2s that I used in a mod many years ago, the 1x2x2. Those 2x2s are actually what this is made out of. I just rediscovered these cores recently. They are basically fully functional 2x2s, and I will be using them for some very exciting mods coming up soon, so stay tuned. This is a 1x1x2 without stickers or anything that I believe I designed and 3D printed as a prototype for the spinny parts of my Z3 cube. Next up are my various 1x1s. I have a ton of these, especially the cubic ones, but obviously I only keep one of each of them to go in my collection. collection. So this was my very first attempt at a 1x1. It's made out of black painted Legos and then inexplicably covered in packing tape with paper stickers on top. Here's my next iteration of a 1x1, made out of a black painted die, as with the rest of them, also with paper stickers, but looking a little bit nicer this time. Here's kind of the same thing, but with slightly bigger stickers, which look like they've been water stained somehow. Here's the same thing again, but with actual Rubik's Cube stickers on them, looking pretty nice this time. Here's another version of the same thing that presumably was abused for a video somehow. I don't exactly remember why. Here's another version of the same thing that apparently has magnets, because why not? And here's one more that doesn't have stickers and presumably has also been through some sort of abuse. Now at one point I thought, wouldn't it be nice to have a real 1x1? And so I went ahead and bought a cubicle 1x1, and then I promptly forgot about it. A little while later I was thinking, wouldn't it be nice to have a real 1x1? And so I went ahead and bought another cubicle 1x1, and that's how I ended up with two of them. This is a 1x1 Pyraminx that I made out of the tip of a normal Pyraminx, and that means it's a duplicate with the other 1x1 Pyraminx I have from the cubicle. And I know I showed this one off in my last cube collection video, but let's just say that my original 1x1 Megaminx is not quite up to the same quality standards as the cubicle one. Now this is kind of in the same vein as the 1x1s, not exactly a real puzzle, but it is branded by Mefferts, 2013. I think it came as a bonus with the Oscars treasure chest. It's this little crystal cube thing. And finally, we're moving on to the rest of the puzzles on my shelf that aren't part of my cube collection because they're not cubes. They're not even really twisty puzzles at all. First is another older puzzle that my grandma gave me, the 15 puzzle. The original stickers were falling off, so I added my own. Basically, the goal is to slide these tiles around to get the numbers in the right order. It's pretty easy and kind of fun. Next up is the Gordian's Knot, a very special puzzle to me because a tutorial on how to do this was one of the very first YouTube videos I ever made and then remade on this current channel. Basically, the goal is to kind of slide these tiles around until they're all separate, and I don't remember how to do it. This is another one of those old puzzles from my dad. It has a bunch of different colored balls. You can tilt them back and forth and then spin it around like this to put them in different slots. Presumably the goal is to match up all the colors, but the furthest I ever got was just doing the red ones. The rest of them are pretty difficult looking. This is just like a three-dimensional maze. So you start with this little ball bearing on one side of the ball, and you can kind of tilt it around and try and get it all the way over to the other side. This is one of those silly fidget cubes. I think my sister gave it to me and I never used it out of protest. Basically, it just has a bunch of different buttons and stuff that you can play with. I have absolutely no idea what this is or where it came from. I mean, China, apparently. I guess the idea is to get the balls through the holes or get the balls to balance on top of the holes without falling through or something like that. These next few are wooden puzzles, so you have a bunch of different pieces that you have to fit together into the correct shape. Solving these has never really appealed to me at all. As you can see, this one hasn't really been taken out of the plastic wrap. This next one at the very least has been taken out of the box. I'm not sure if I've ever solved it though. I just tried messing around with it for a minute and I could not figure out how to even get it started. Now this is the one that I have at least solved before, probably using the included instruction manual. I think the first move is to do something tricky like rotating this one and lifting this up, but yeah, again, I don't have much interest in these. And finally we have perhaps the strangest thing of them all, one of those wooden puzzles where you have to slide the tiles around and get them past each other to get them off the board. But the really weird thing, this was actually sent to me by the Cubicle, discount code G3Cubing for 5% off, and made by Chi Yi. In fact, it seems like they've taken their lessons from speed cubing into the wooden slidey puzzle business because this thing is actually magnetic. It makes me actually want to open it up and try it. Okay, I stand corrected. It's actually plastic and not wood, but as you can see, the tiles snap into place magnetically as you move them around, which is pretty cool. And the ultimate goal is to get this big tile, the Chi Yi girl, out from this opening, obviously without any of the other tiles leaving the board. And just messing around with it for a few minutes here, it does seem pretty difficult. I can't really figure out how to move it at all. Luckily, there is an 81-step instruction guide to show you exactly how to do it. Anyway, I hope you all have enjoyed this break from my normal cube collection and into the world of random puzzles that I've acquired over the years. As always, don't forget to leave a comment about rhinoceroses to show me that you've made it this far. And that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys next time. This is the Yushin Haze 7M, a top-of-the-line flagship 7x7 from about 4 years ago. That means in the year 2022, it's in this awkward position where the turning isn't bad, but it's also not great. And I think that's a shame. So in this video, since I don't think we're going to be making it turn any better, I figured why not run in the exact opposite direction and try and make it turn as terrible as possible. That way, at least it has something going for it. So on this journey to the world's worst 7x7, you better bet we're going to be dumping in every cube lubricant known to man, as well as possibly a few things that aren't exactly cube lubricants. It's going to be a good time. But it turns out there's plenty of more interesting ways to make a cube terrible without a drop of lube involved. So we're going to be saving this chaos till the end of the video, and in the meantime, we're going to get started by messing around with this cube's magnets. If you don't know, one of the most hilarious mods that you can do to a magnetic cube is to just flip around half the magnets so that they always repel each other instead of attracting. That way, instead of getting that nice snap at the end of each turn, the layers will just refuse to align at all. Now, part of the reason I chose the Haze 7M is it was one of the first magnetic 7x7s before cube manufacturers figured out how to glue those magnets in super efficiently, so it's actually pretty easy to pry the magnets out and then glue them back in backwards. Now, I think my strategy is going to be to leave all the corners alone, flip around all the magnets in these types of edges, leave these edges alone, and then also flip around all the magnets in these inner edges. That way, every single pair of magnets on the cube will be reversed. So let's go ahead and take it apart and see how feasible that is. So these types of pieces I'll be leaving as is, and then on these types of pieces, I'll be flipping around all the magnets. So there should be 2 inside of each piece. Yep, there we go. And so let's just take a knife and see how easy these are to pry out. Okay, so I got all 6 magnets out of those pieces. It wasn't too difficult. So now let's break out the super glue, glue them all back in the wrong direction, and then see how they interact with the pieces that they're supposed to attract to. Okay, so here is the first section of reverse magnets. As you can see, these pieces definitely want to stick together. Let's see what happens if we just let go of them. Yeah, it basically just self-destructs. So anyway, all you have to do now is repeat that on the remaining sections of the cube. So let's start the time lapse. After an unusually difficult assembly process, because the pieces were not being very cooperative, the reverse magnet 7x7 is assembled, and as you can see, the alignment is impeccable. But before we see just how annoying it is to turn, there is one more thing that I switched up about this cube while I had it taken apart. Can you spot it? It's the kind of thing that you either don't notice at all, or it will annoy you to no end. And that is, the color scheme is wrong. That's right, it looks perfectly fine on first glance, but in reality, it's the mirror image of where the colors are supposed to be, which should annoy all cubers to no end. It's actually super easy to do this, you just swap around 2 pieces of each corner. Anyway, on to the turning. Luckily, this cube does have some pretty good corner cutting to begin with, so hopefully this alignment won't be too big of an issue. Yeah, there we go, it just cuts right through it, but then it starts being misaligned on a different layer, just like that. So let's try doing an algorithm to see just how terrible it really is. And yeah, that is pretty bad. It's kind of just locking up, like catching on every single turn. That is actually pretty remarkable considering that all we've done so far is swap around those magnets. One thing that I did notice though is that I've always had the tensions kind of tight on this cube, and I think by loosening those up, we can actually give the pieces more room to spread out and feel even more terrible. But while we're loosening those, I think we should also take the opportunity to mess around with the springs. I've noticed on big cubes that the springs tend to be relatively strong because the cube is pretty heavy, so you want it to push back quite a bit. And so I figure, why not replace them with the weakest springs possible? I found these springs here that are for like a lightweight 3x3, and they should make this cube feel super floppy. Okay, so the cube has been threatening to explode as I unscrew it, which is pretty funny, but take a look at this spring. The proportions are super weird, like it's super skinny, but as I expected, it is super strong. So replacing it with this little weak spring should be perfect. The only problem is it might not actually fit inside the hole. So let's check it out, and yeah, no, that does not fit in there at all. So I guess if we have no other springs that'll fit, our only other option is to ditch the spring entirely and just put the screw in there alone. I think that should help things turn suitably terrible, so let's go around the cube, loosen things up, and remove all of the springs. Okay, I think that little bit of looseness was exactly what we needed because this thing is already looking so much more terrible. Let's try and turn it. Yeah, the pieces are so spread out now that even the corner cutting can't save it. It is just absolutely awful. Okay, now there is one more little thing I want to do before just throwing random lubes at it, and that is I want to make this cube not only feel annoying, but also sound annoying. You might already be able to hear that little bit of a rattle. That's because I've already started down this path by adding a few little washers inside of the pieces, but I want to make that rattle 10 times worse. So let's just open up the cube and throw a ball bearing inside. Or, you know, maybe 8 of them. There isn't a whole lot of room down there, but I think these ones will at least fit, and hopefully it should make it very, very annoying. Okay, on second look, there is actually a lot less room down there than I thought there was, so hopefully the cube should still turn. And it seems like it does. Is it annoying? Oh yeah, that's a lot worse than it was before. You know what? I was just about to say that unfortunately we can't have extra ball bearings rattling around in the edge pieces because they would just stick to the magnets, but then I realized that we don't have to use ball bearings. We can just use little bits of plastic to rattle around and be extra super annoying. Luckily I have lots of little bits of extra plastic, so let's try it. So now with bits of plastic in every single edge piece, we now have insanely loud rattling for maximum annoyance. Anyway, without further ado, I think it's finally time we get on to the lubrication. We're gonna start out with DNM37. It's gonna make this cube nice and fast because speed is definitely this cube's problem. So let's just drop in a drop or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6. And let's break that in and see how it turns. A little bit hard to break it in when you can't really turn the puzzle to begin with, but yeah, it's definitely a little bit faster now, a little bit less friction. That means the pieces can slide past each other a little bit easier and be a little bit more annoying, so that's good. So how about Lubical Silk? I still got my original bottle. This should make the cube nice and smooth. Let's add a few drops in there. And this is gonna take too long if I do them all separately, so let's also add a bit of cubicle weight 2, as well as some weight 4. That'll also make the cube nice and smooth. Just put a whole bunch in there. Okay, let's break it in. I'm expecting this to make the cube feel a little bit more sluggish, but also nice and smooth, and it feels like that is indeed what is happening. Okay, lightning round. Let's do some Lubical Speedy. Couple drops in there. How about Lubical 1? Let's add some of that. Okay, Compound X from Engstrom. There we go. How about Mystic? Let's add some of that. Doesn't really like to come out of the bottle, but there we go. And then Celeritaz, part A. Just stick that right on there, as well as some of part B. And let's try and get this all to go inside of the cube. Oh, it's kind of leaking out. There we go. Okay, that whole mix of lubes has sort of a weird sweet smell to it. I wonder where that's coming from. I guess it could be the plant-based Mystic. It's also getting all over the outside of the puzzle. My hands are starting to feel a little bit sticky, but the puzzle itself, it actually feels kind of nice. It's kind of this smooth gliding feeling to the turning, kind of frictionless. I actually kind of like it. Let's go ahead and add a little bit of both Engstrom Gravitas and Dignitas. I can never remember which one is which. These are supposed to be carefully added to specific parts of the pieces, but of course, I'm just gonna stick it in there and see what happens. So let's break that in. That actually did make the cube a little bit slower and more controllable while still being nice and smooth. I like it. Now another interesting pair of lubes is Max Command and Max Fleet. Let's add some of that right down the middle there. This is basically just silicone. This is some weird non-Newtonian stuff, so let's stick that in there. Oh, and for good measure, because we forgot to lube the core earlier, let's add in a little bit of Lubical Black right into the pieces. That can't hurt, right? I mean, it can make a mess and stain everything, but oh well. Let's break that in and see how it turns. Yeah, I mean, it definitely turns. Admittedly, the turning has been going downhill pretty quickly, but that's fine because I believe there's a lubricant that can fix everything. And that is WD-40. So let's go ahead and stick the straw in here and... oh, that's a nice noise. So let's go over to the other side of the cube and add a little bit more over here. Oh, I missed the cube a little bit. That's fine. Let's go over here. There we go, getting all over the outside. And this stuff definitely does smell. It's also getting all over everything, so let's wipe that off real quick. It's hard to describe, but it suddenly smells like I'm holding some sort of mechanical device that should have gears and stuff. The turning has definitely gone downhill. It's like all the cube lube is just gone and replaced with just nice and smooth, but also just terrible feeling. Like just the quality of the plastic is gone, and it feels like it's replaced with something other than plastic. Also, it is all over my hands. Anyway, I think the only solution to this is to sanitize it with some hand sanitizer. Let's throw some of that in. Okay, that didn't actually make it into the cube very well, so let's go around to the other side and try that again. Hand sanitizer. There we go. Ooh, that also has a distinct smell to it. It's also kind of bringing out the smell of the WD-40 back. That's a little bit weird, and ooh, it's on a cut in my hand. That hurts. There's no escape from it being all over the outside of the puzzle now. It almost makes the cube feel a little bit faster, but kind of in a watery way. It still has that weird sort of not quite plastic feeling to it from the WD-40. It's weird. The cube almost feels more tight again. Like there's so much stuff jammed inside that there's physically less room for the pieces to move around. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but it is what I'm feeling. And as I'm working it in more, it definitely is getting a lot slower, a lot more friction, just so much more unpleasant to turn. So I think that means it's time for the grand finale, the best cube lubricant of all time, and that is Vaseline. So let's open this up here and just stick a whole glob of this inside of the puzzle. It's kind of hard to get it into the puzzle physically, so I guess we have to work it around all different sides. Yeah, let's do this, and this, work that in. There we go. And you know what, just for good measure, let's go around to the other side of the cube too and get a whole nother glob. Stick that on there and there and there, just get it all over the place, work that in. And yeah, just get that all nice and broken in. Okay, I've kind of given up on keeping my hands dry at this point, which means that this cube is now very slippery. Let's try and do like one more algorithm to finish off the video. How about a J-perm? Okay, I give up. That's too hard. The magnets are reversed. The color scheme is wrong. It sounds like a maraca. There's no springs, so it's just sort of floppy. It was super loose. Now it feels kind of tight. It has about a dozen cube lubes in it and a bunch of things that aren't cube lubes, and now it is super slippery to the point where I can hardly hold it. I'm going to finish things off by doing a quick solve, or rather a slow one. Keep in mind that my normal 7x7 average is around 5 minutes, so I hope you all enjoyed, and let's see how this goes. This is the Yushin Gigaminx. I just recently unboxed it, and it is easily the new best turning Gigaminx on the market. But no matter how smooth and fast and fluid and stable that turning may be, I still have one big problem with it that I just cannot get over. Let me demonstrate by trying to do a J-perm. And as you can see right there, that is the problem. As I was trying to turn just these outer layers, this inner layer went ahead and moved right along with it. You might say, big deal, just don't touch the inner layers if you don't want to move them. But that's a lot easier said than done when the layers are as tiny as they are on the Gigaminx. I find myself having to adjust my turning style and stick my thumb right here just to prevent those inner layers from moving. And this issue is exactly the reason that magnets became so popular on big cubes. It's not the same reason as on a 3x3, where you get that nice tactile snappy feeling and a bit of extra stability. No, the main reason magnets are nice on big cubes is because it prevents you from turning layers that you don't mean to. Most magnetic big cubes have a really clever design where the inner layer magnets are actually noticeably stronger than the outer layer magnets. That way, even if your finger is sort of bumping into that next layer down, it's still not going to go anywhere as you're turning the outer layers. Compare that to the Yushin Gigaminx, where if your finger is even touching that inner layer, well, yeah, it is just going to go along for the ride. So I think you all see where this video is going. Let's go ahead and try and solve this problem by adding magnets to the Yushin Gigaminx. That might sound like a pretty simple proposition, but let me just tell you, it's not. For one thing, a dodecahedral puzzle like this has 12 of these edge sections, and on a Gigaminx, you're gonna need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 magnets per edge section. That's a total of 240 magnets on this puzzle. And not only are you going to need as many magnets as on an 11 by 11 cube, but they're also going to need to be tiny and weird shapes and sizes. Because I can tell you one thing, the edges and corners of a Gigaminx are not ideal for adding magnets to. And that's not even to mention how heavy the end result is going to be. This is already not a light puzzle, and we're about to make it quite a lot worse. But without further ado, let's go ahead and see just how bad it's really going to be and open this puzzle up. I think the way I'm going to do it is just by unscrewing one of these centerpieces. Alright, are you ready for this? The screw is out and it's not coming apart. There we go. There is the inside of a Gigaminx. That looks amazing. Anyway, to magnetize a Gigaminx, all we have to worry about are the edges and the corners. So let me go ahead and grab one of each type of those so I can show you what we're up against. So here are the 3 types of pieces that we have to deal with: the big edges, the little edges, and the corners. Luckily, these all have very simple stickerless designs, 2 parts for the edges and 3 parts for the corners, so they should all be very easy to take apart, just like this. Now it works out so that each one of these pieces gets exactly 1 magnet. Each one of these corner sections attaches to 1/2 of these smaller edges, just like this, and the other half of the smaller edges attaches to 1/2 of these bigger edges, just like this. Now luckily for this type of pairing with the bigger edges, as you can see, we have a nice big shared wall right there that pretty much any reasonable sized magnet will fit into, just like that. These are 5x1 magnets, by the way. They should be really easy to glue in there and hopefully plenty strong. If not, I can just add more on top of them. And the really nice thing is these pairs with the bigger edges are actually the pairs that control the inner layer of turning, which again is where we want to have the stronger magnets. So if we need to make them stronger, it's very easy to make these ones stronger. Now, unfortunately, things are not so nice and easy when it comes to the other pairs with the corners. I mean, just look at that. Where are you going to fit a magnet in there? That hole would be way too small to fit a magnet of any reasonable strength. So what are we going to do? Well, take a look for a second. Where else could we fit a magnet? How about way down here? It'll definitely look kind of funny putting magnets all the way down here by the core, but it should work well enough for the Gigaminx. As you can see on the edge piece, there's plenty of room right there, and on the corner piece, there's a hole that's just big enough to fit an appropriately sized magnet. Just like that. Now I'm going with a normal 4x2 magnet in the edges and a little tiny 3x2 magnet in the corners. They're not perfectly lined up, but I think it should be good enough for a nice magnetic snap in the outer layers, and hopefully good enough for the pieces to actually close once we glue them in. I don't think I've ever magnetized a puzzle with as creative a solution as this one, or frankly, any puzzle with as many pieces as this one, but I think it'll just about work out. Anyway, I think I've explained to you the whole plan, so it's time to break out the super glue and then break this puzzle apart so that we can go ahead and add 240 magnets. Let's go ahead and start the time lapse. Alright, that was a lot of magnets indeed. If 240 doesn't sound like a lot, just keep in mind that for every single one of these pieces, you first have to break it apart, grab each half, grab a template piece that already has a magnet on it, stick it onto that piece in exactly the right way, grab your super glue, put it on exactly the right surface, grab the right type of magnet, stick it on there, kind of nudge it around to make sure it's in exactly the right spot, then just sit there and wait for 10 or 20 seconds for the glue to dry, and then finally once all the magnets are in, you then have to put them back together. It might not sound like too bad of a process, it comes out to just under a minute per magnet, but once you multiply that by 240, that means it takes almost 4 hours to magnetize all these pieces. But besides taking a while, everything went pretty much according to plan, except for one thing that surprised me inside of these big edge pieces. Originally, there were 4 of these little posts here sticking up, but as you can see, now there's just 3. So I actually had to remove this 4th post. As you can see right there, it's chopped off with the help of some heavy-duty tools, and that's because when you put the 2 pieces together, that post actually sticks exactly where the magnet on the other piece goes. I'm not sure why there's a post there. It's not like there's any hole for it to go into, but nonetheless, we had to chop that off on all 60 of these pieces just so that they would fit together after gluing the magnets in. But as you can see here, we can go ahead and construct a little corner edge section, and they all stick together perfectly with those magnets. I can already tell that the inner magnets are just a little bit stronger than the outer magnets, which is perfect. That's exactly what we want. But without further ado, we can also now grab all the other pieces that weren't magnetized, as well as of course the core, and then put this Gigaminx back together. Let's start the time lapse. Alright, and here is the fully magnetic Gigaminx, now fully assembled. I will say in terms of first impressions that this thing is noticeably heavier than it was before, although frankly, the Gigaminx is such a heavy puzzle in the first place that adding a bunch of magnets doesn't actually make that big of a difference proportionally. Now the funny thing is, I went ahead and weighed this puzzle, and it turns out that it's actually still lighter than the original Shengshao Gigaminx. You wouldn't be able to tell it in your hands, I guess because this one is smaller, so it feels a little bit denser, but it turns out it's actually not that heavy. Anyway, until GAN finally comes out with their Gigaminx Air M, weight probably isn't going to be too big of a concern for Gigaminx speed solvers. Let's move on to what you've all been waiting for, the turning. So starting off with these inner layers here, and that is actually really nice. You have a definite tactile bump after every turn, but you also have just the right amount of softness. It's not too harsh of a click, and it kind of guides you into place perfectly. That's what those big, wide 5x1 magnets are really good for, especially on a big cube like this. And as for the outer layers, okay, yeah, that is just perfect. Definitely a little bit weaker than the inner layers, which is exactly what we were going for, but you still have that nice soft feeling because the magnets are a little bit deeper down into the cube. And as for the ultimate test, what I was doing at the beginning of the video, having my thumb just barely touching this inner layer here as I turn the outer layer, oh my gosh, that is perfect. My thumb is rubbing against it on every single turn, and it is not moving. So in theory, that means I should now be able to do my J-perm in peace without the inner layers going crazy. So let's try it. Oh my gosh, that is